Chapter 722. The residual fire swastika sword. Boom! A deafening impact shattered the hush over the Seirei. Esdeath's blade and Yamamoto Junryu Saishigekuni's sword collided in a shower of sparks, the very air seeming to tear itself apart. Each time Yamamoto swung his weapon, a scorching heat wave rolled outward, forcing the surrounding Shinigami to retreat in alarm. Esdeath felt the raw, unfathomable power behind every one of Yamamoto's blows. Warriors of his caliber were rare, but she was no ordinary combatant. After all, she could obliterate stars at will. Still, the Ryukenwaka blade he wielded gave her pause. Without the protective reinforcement of her chi, she never would have dared close the distance on such intense flame. She twisted her lips into a confident smile. So this is how it is. Let's dispense with the theatrics. Don't tell me you've forgotten your swastika technique. Her eyes gleamed with anticipation. She relished the prospect of facing a powerful opponent, and she was more than eager to witness the next devastating move he had in store. Yamamoto Junryu Saishigekuni's stern features tightened at her words. He understood all too well that Esdeath's ultimate move wasn't a parlor trick, but a fight to the death. Yet he also knew the power of his Bankai, and how recklessly unleashing it could tear apart Seirei itself, even endangering his own men. He hesitated. My Bankai cannot be used lightly, he rumbled, his voice low and steady. Esdeath gave him no quarter. In an instant, her eyes grew colder, her energy flared, and she swung her blade. The impact drove Yamamoto stumbling back across the courtyard, and Ethan, caught off guard, felt the wind of the slash nearly rip him in two. If you don't take me seriously, you will die, Esdeath said, her tone as icy as the blade she wielded. Yamamoto hit the ground, then forced himself up again, blood oozing from several shallow cuts across his arms and chest. The wounds weren't deep, but they were proof enough of the gap between his strength and hers. It had been years since he'd suffered an injury like this, and the sting of it only sharpened his resolve. The enemy's Reiatsu was so overwhelming it shattered Yamamoto Junryu Saishigekuni's defenses. Few had ever managed to wound him, and yet here he was, bleeding and barely holding on. He understood that unless he truly unleashed himself, this would be his final battle. In that desperate instant, he made a fateful decision. He would release his Bankai. Drawing in a steadying breath, Yamamoto clenched Ryuken, Wakusetsu Taisanto in both hands. It's been a long time since I last called forth my Bankai, he murmured, voice low but steeled with resolve. Then, with a thunderous cry that rolled across the hushed battlefield, he bellowed, Bankai, Zanka no Tachi! The great sword flared to life, igniting in a blaze of searing heat that warped the very air around it. Hot, dancing flames traced the length of the blade, as if the sword itself had become molten fire. Channeling every ounce of his formidable Reiatsu into the attack, Yamamoto drew back and brought the inferno-tipped blade down in a single devastating arc. Ethan unleashed an unimaginable force, the sheer violence of it, like a volcanic eruption tearing through the air. In an instant, the surrounding atmosphere detonated, giving birth to a colossal pillar of flame that soared hundreds of meters into the sky. Its brilliance was so intense it seemed to dye the heavens blood red. At 15 million degrees, hotter than the sun's core, the inferno seared and warped even the fabric of space. Rocks and soil alike didn't burn so much as instantly disintegrate into fine ash, leaving no trace of their former solidity. From a safe distance, onlookers recoiled in terror, scrambling backward to escape any lingering fallout. Their faces were ashen, for they recognized that this was no ordinary clash, but a lethal duel between two of the world's most formidable warriors. Yet across from the blazing column of fire, Esdeath did not flinch. She stood her ground, steel rod, a solve in every posture, a flicker of exhilaration dancing in her eyes. This was precisely the kind of battle she craved, one that would push both fighters to their absolute limits. Esdeath felt the raw, terrifying power radiating from the flame, and it thrilled her. A confident, almost arrogant smile curved her lips. You've truly surprised me. She turned her cool gaze on Yamamoto Junryu Saishigekuni. He met her stare with steel in his eyes. He knew all too well that once his swastika technique fully unleashed its power, its searing heat would vaporize everything in the Soul Society. If it burned long enough, it would reduce the entire land to scorched earth, as if a second sun had risen overhead. He had to end this fight before that happened. "I must stop you, now," Yamamoto bellowed. His Reiatsu surged outward like a force field. The surrounding air seemed to harden, pressing heavily against everyone present. The suffocating weight of his aura bore down on their chests, each breath growing more labored by the second. Then, snap. Ethan's fingers cracked together sharply, the sound cutting through the tension like a morning bell or a thunderous drum. The snap reverberated through the air and struck every heart with startling clarity, arresting the battle in a single, electrifying instant. Everyone froze, as though struck by an unseen force. Even the seasoned Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni halted in mid-motion, his eyes widening, pupils constricting in shock. He stared at the scene before him, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. What's happening? Yamamoto's voice trembled. He had been engaged in a fierce duel with Aizen Sosuke, whose power had pushed him to unleash his Bankai. Yet now, the man before him was no Aizen. This adversary was a stranger, someone entirely unexpected. Aizen Sosuke himself watched Ethan with curiosity. Unohana Retsu, Kyoraku Shunsui, Ukitake Jushiro, and the other captains exchanged bewildered glances. They couldn't understand why Yamamoto had just stopped, why his expression was so utterly astonished. "What just occurred?" one of them murmured. Meanwhile, Esdeath stood poised, every nerve alert. She felt an overwhelming surge of heat coalesce around her blade. The next strike she delivered would not merely wound, it would have the power to annihilate the world itself. Chapter 723. The show is about to begin. "I'm not facing Aizen Sosuke." General Jonryu Yamamoto planted himself at the center of the battlefield, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. The charred remnants of his flaming sword, an emblem of his unrivaled authority, rested heavily in his hand, yet at that moment he felt an unfamiliar emptiness gnawing at him. He paused, replaying the last clash in his mind, before his eyes drifted across the field to Shunsui Kyoraku and Jushiro Ukitake. Seeing their faces only deepened his doubt. Even Kyoraku, the ever-casual captain who normally wore a lazy grin, now looked startled. His eyes widened as if to confirm he'd heard Yamamoto correctly. He let out a half-chuckle that trembled on the edge of nerves. "Old man," Kyoraku teased with mock concern, "have you finally lost your eyesight? Can't you even see your opponent?" His laughter echoed, but it froze almost immediately, the tension on the battlefield swallowing the sound whole. Ethan realized in that moment that Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni's warning had purpose. Pressing down the brim of his straw hat, he willed the tremor of fear in his chest to still. Surely something far more terrifying lurked here on this battlefield. Kyoraku Shunsui's words had left the fire captain momentarily speechless. Yamamoto's gaze swept the clearing, searching for the one presence that chilled them all, Sosuke Aizen. Aizen's laughter cut across the field like a warm breeze laced with frost. He raised his left hand with deliberate grace, letting the sun catch the blade of his zanpakuto so that it gleamed with cold light. "Allow me to unveil the truth and shatter your illusions," he said softly. "Kyoka Suigetsu, mirror flower, water moon." The very air seemed to still. A hush fell as Aizen continued, his voice calm and confident. "My zanpakuto's ability is complete hypnosis." His words struck like needles, each one piercing their hearts. Absolute hypnosis? None of them had ever heard of such power. It was nothing like the abilities Aizen had admitted to before, and their shock rippled through the gathered captains and lieutenants. "A lie? I've always felt something was off about you. Could it be, it's not a mere doll? I'm the one under hypnosis?" Unohana Retsu's voice trembled. She thought back to the body she'd attacked, believing it was Aizen's, and a chill ran through her. Could it be she hadn't been fighting a puppet at all, but was herself ensnared by Aizen's spell? The notion made her shudder. True hypnosis can manipulate all five senses, making you misjudge form, condition, texture, even taste, and turn the target into an enemy in your eyes. Aizen Sosuke offered a calm smile. "So, Captain, do you see now? You were certain you'd killed me, but you struck the wrong person." Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni fell silent for a heartbeat, then inclined his head. It was exactly as Aizen had orchestrated, everyone trapped in his hypnosis from the start. The key to activating Kyoka Suigetsu, flower in the mirror, water in the moon, is that the observer must witness the moment of release. Aizen's tone remained steady. From the instant I meet you, you become completely hypnotized, and once I unleash Kyoka Suigetsu, you will be utterly under my control. I see. At that moment, Unohana Retsu, Kyoraku Shunsui, and the others all pieced it together. Wait, only once? Shunsui's eyes narrowed as he turned to Sosuke Aizen, anger and disbelief warring behind his gaze. They'd been duped simply because they'd only ever seen Aizen release his Zanpakuto one single time, and in that fleeting instant, they were unable to gauge his true power. The realization left them both furious and helpless. Aizen offered a faint, knowing smile. Yes, only once. He gave a slight flourish of his hand. You see, no one can prepare for an ability they can't perceive. From the very beginning, Dongshan has served me loyally. With that gesture, two shadowy figures materialized at his side, Ichimaru Gin and Tosen Kaname, long hidden and waiting for their moment to act. Osen's voice carried a note of urgency. Captain Aizen, our strategy may be unraveling. That travel anomaly actually shattered the mirror. Ichimaru Gin leveled a cool, unblinking stare at Ethan. Don't worry, he said softly. Although Jinghua Shuiwei cracked sooner than I expected, there is no truly invincible power in this world. Aizen's confidence was absolute. Exactly. If you lose control of your senses, do you really think you can slip away from me? Captain Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni's voice rumbled like distant thunder, each syllable a war hammer striking everyone present. Aizen merely tilted his head, that familiar, assured smile lingering on his lips. He met Yamamoto's steely gaze without hesitation. Captain, I've never underestimated you, he replied evenly, amusement flickering in his tone. But this world is full of surprises, isn't it? His glance drifted to Ethan, the lone traveler from another realm, an unexpected linchpin in Aizen's design. Had Ethan not stepped in, I'd never have dared act so boldly. Yet now everything is in motion, and the moment of reckoning draws near. Yamamoto narrowed his eyes. Humph. Aizen, you've concealed your true self so thoroughly that I sometimes wonder whether I know you at all. Aizen's smile deepened, calm and confident as ever, as though every piece of the puzzle rested safely in his hands. Shunsui Kyoraku stood firm, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Across from him, Sosuke Aizen regarded him with a cool, appraising smile. You're a formidable opponent, Captain, Aizen conceded, his tone deceptively calm. But you're fixated on raw power, blinded to the true purpose. From the very beginning, I've known exactly what I wanted. Shunsui's eyes sharpened with suspicion. And what you want is to rule the world. Aizen's lips curved into an arrogant smirk. Rule the world? Hardly the endgame. It's only the opening move. He paused, letting his words hang in the charged air. My goal is far grander, to transcend this realm entirely. Beyond mortals and gods alike, there lies a higher plane, and there I alone shall stand. Before Shunsui could retort, the heavens above them shattered with a thunderous crack. A jagged rift tore through the sky, as if the fabric of time and space itself had been sundered. From its depths came a deep, primal roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. Then, 3 blinding beams of light speared down from the breach, enveloping Aizen, Gin Ichimaru, and Kaname Tosen. The glow was otherworldly, humming with a power that felt neither human nor divine, but something far older and more terrifying. As the lights swirled around them, the assembled captains sensed that whatever was coming through that rift would change everything. Chapter 7-4. Stay, is that an anti-membrane? General Yamamoto, Genryusai Shigekuni narrowed his eyes at the strange, shimmering barrier unfolding before him. His face went stone-cold the moment he recognized it. The anti-membrane, the very power Aizen deployed in life-or-death moments to shield his allies, was cutting through space itself, brutally separating inside from out. Anyone trapped within would be powerless to stop Aizen's escape from the territory they had vowed to defend at all costs. Around Yamamoto, Captains Shunsui Kyoraku and Jushiro Ukitake, along with the other senior officers of the Gotei 13, wore expressions of grim helplessness. They knew full well that once Aizen slipped away, the Soul Society would be deprived of one of its greatest champions, and the world beyond would face a threat unlike any before. Aizen, Shunsui shouted, his voice trembling with equal parts fury and disbelief. What are you planning? Aizen turned slowly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips, as if he had long since grown accustomed to their anger and their confusion. For a higher realm. Aizen spoke deliberately, his voice brimming with unshakable resolve. From the very beginning, there has been no ruler in heaven, neither you nor I, not even God himself. This intolerable interregnum on the heavenly throne is about to end. From this moment on, I will rule heaven. Ambition and dominance dripped from Aizen's words, sending a chill through everyone present. They all understood that he was no ordinary traitor. His aspirations reached far beyond mere rebellion. He coveted the entire world, unlimited power, and absolute authority. You, Kyoraku Shinsui began, anger flaring in his eyes, but before he could continue, Yamamoto Janryusai stepped forward. Enough, Yamamoto rumbled, his deep voice echoing with both resignation and steel. If things have come to this, we must face reality. But hear me, Aizen, no matter where you flee, no matter what you become, we of the Gotei 13 will never let you escape. Aizen's lips curved into a faint, dismissive smile, as though Yamamoto's declaration meant nothing to him. Then we'll see. Ethan's calm declaration hung in the air as he turned to the two figures wrapped in the shimmering membrane, Ichimaru Gin and Tosen Kaname. Yin, Dongxian, let's move. His voice carried an ironclad resolve. There's nothing in this world we're leaving behind. No sooner had the trio lifted their feet toward the barrier's surface than a crisp snap rang out, sharp as morning bells and stirring as evening drums. The membrane, on the verge of sealing them in, froze mid-collapse, then scattered into motes of light, dissolving like shattered glass. Aizen, Ichimaru, and Tosen stood rooted in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. Their supposedly foolproof counter-barrier had failed at the most critical moment. A short distance away, Ethan lounged atop his magic carriage, a playful grin curving his lips. It'd be mighty arrogant to attack my men and then vanish, Soul Reaper, he said coolly, voice brimming with unshakable authority. Aizen's expression darkened the moment he heard Ethan's threat. He hadn't expected such a formidable opponent to appear at this crucial juncture. After a heartbeat, he inclined his head once. Very well, he said. Then let us make this a proper battle. In an instant, Aizen's form dissolved like smoke, leaving only his lingering voice in the air. Ethan had challenged him, and Aizen was determined to probe the young man's true strength. Let me at him, Kenpachi Zaraki roared, eager to test his own power. Before Kenpachi even moved, Aizen reappeared, Kyoka Suigetsu glinting in his hand. With a single fluid motion, a blade flashed and buried itself in Kenpachi's side, so fast that no one saw it drawn or sheathed. The captain collapsed to one knee, clutching the wound, eyes wide with shock and indignation. Never before had he felt so helpless against any foe. Standing at the edge of the clearing, Shinsui Kyoraku watched in stunned silence. He'd always asked. Umed Aizen's arrogance stemmed from the hypnotic might of Kyoka Suigetsu. Now he realized there was far more to this man's power than mere illusions. As crimson seeped through Kenpachi's grip, the tension on the battlefield crackled anew. Ethan's arrival had shattered all expectations, and Aizen's true strength was only beginning to surface. A real fight was about to ignite. Ethan's heart pounded as he faced Aizen. Even without the mirror, Aizen Sosuke's power was terrifyingly clear. Ethan could only make out fleeting afterimages of Aizen's blade as it sliced through the air. After all, Aizen had been groomed as the next captain and already surpassed the strength of most lieutenants. The only thing he still lacked, compared to the ancient captains, was an even deeper mastery of Reiatsu. In the Gotei, the gap between captains themselves is far greater than that between a captain and an ordinary Shinigami. Among captains, some could fell 100 peers in the blink of an eye, while others would be cut down just as swiftly. The most feared of all are the so-called millennial captains, warriors who have held their haori for 1,000 years, their experience and spiritual power rendering them virtually invincible. Consider Kyoraku Shinsui, for example. He's a centenary captain, over 100 years in command. And in the Soul Society, the passage of time only cements a Shinigami's foundation. Decades of refining swordsmanship, strengthening their Reiatsu, and mastering their Bankai. Yet even Shinsui could barely register so much as a shimmer of Aizen's blade. That alone speaks volumes about the blistering speed behind every one of Aizen's strikes. Ethan stood a few paces behind the fallen Kenpachi Zaraki, his eyes widening as he watched the aftermath of Aizen Sosuke's strike. Blood trickled down Kenpachi's forehead as he lay on the scorched earth, pressing a trembling hand to the wound. The strength of that man. Shunsui Kyoraku muttered under his breath, disbelief etched on his face. Ethan felt a flash of sympathy for Kenpachi. He knew how much the captain had held back, how he'd sealed away the bulk of his power and refused to learn his Zanpakuto's Shikai, or Bankai. None of that mattered in the face of Aizen's full might. It was inevitable that Kenpachi would be cut down by a single, perfectly placed slash. Before Ethan could step forward, the wind shifted. A haunting chill rippled across the battlefield, and suddenly Esdeath was standing between Aizen and Kenpachi. Steel rang against steel as her sword caught Aizen's blade, sending sparks scattering into the night. A stunned hush fell over everyone. Aizen tilted his head, amber eyes glinting with curiosity. He lowered his blade, studying Esdeath as if encountering something entirely new. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "Fascinating," he said softly. "What exactly are you?" Esdeath's icy gaze met his without a trace of fear. She held her sword in a steady grip, her posture unshaken. Aizen's smile widened, but it carried no warmth. He already knew the breadth of his own power. He had touched the limits of the god of death itself. Yet for all his strength, he hungered for more. Hueco Mundo beckoned, its hollows, the secrets of the Hogyoku. There lay his next opportunity to shatter the boundaries of mortality and ascend beyond any death god, and he intended to seize it. Chapter 725, Nemesis. Aizen Sosuke had long proclaimed his power unrivaled across the three realms, until today. In an instant, two otherworldly wanderers had appeared, each bearing strength that defied comprehension. So great was their fury that Esdeath managed to halt Aizen's blade with a single hand. Their blows tore at the fabric of space itself, sending ripples through the surrounding air. Captain Ichimaru Gin and Lieutenant Tosen Kaname stood with the Seirete captains, watching the clash in tense silence. At last, Gin stepped forward, his trademark grin playing on his lips. "Captain Aizen," he asked lightly, "what's our course of action? Shall we stand and fight or fall back?" Aizen remained unhurried, as composed as ever. "The choice is yours, Jin. Whether we resist or yield, it matters little to me." Esdeath's eyes narrowed at his calm. How dare he still speak so casually in the heat of battle? With a contemptuous snarl, she gathered every ounce of her power into one furious surge. Energy crackled around her arm like a gathering storm as she prepared to strike the final, fatal blow. In that charged moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whose blade would break first. Aizen Sosuke felt a sudden spike in Esdeath's power, and with it, the unmistakable sting of threat. He'd relied on his mirror flower, water moon technique countless times, but against someone like her, his offensive output fell short. Determined to close the gap, he channeled Keto energy through every fiber of his being. Beast bones shattered to dust, spires and wheels of crimson crystal steel. What moves is the wind, what rests is the sky. Spears clash and thunder roars across this virtual city. His words coalesced into the 63rd Keto spell, Thunder Roar Cannon. In an instant, a brilliant orb of crackling lightning formed in Aizen's palm. It pulsed with raw power. One explosive impact was all it would take to decimate anything in its path. Esdeath's eyes widened at the oncoming storm. She braced herself to evade the strike, but before she could act, Ethan, formerly known as Luther, called out urgently from her side. "Focus your Reiatsu just as I taught you." His steady voice cut through her panic, anchoring her will. Gathering every ounce of spiritual pressure, she prepared to face the Thunder Roar Cannon head-on. Esdeath's eyes widened for only a moment before she steadied herself. Drawing in a slow, deliberate breath, she funneled every ounce of her spiritual pressure into her fingertips. Instantly, a concentrated beam of deep blue light, her divine flash, lanced forward. With graceful precision, the arc of energy cleaved through the air and slammed headlong into the volley of thunder and lightning unleashed by Sosuke Aizen. The impact was cataclysmic. A titanic shockwave rippled across the battlefield, shaking the very fabric of space, as if reality itself might tear apart. Standing on the sidelines, Captain Shunsui Kyoraku and Captain Jushiro Ukitake exchanged grim looks. Even among the most elite Soul Reapers, they recognized raw power when they saw it. "That force, it's on par with a number 80 Hollow Void level attack, at minimum," Ukitake murmured, voice low. Shunsui merely nodded, his usual playfulness gone. You don't see this kind of strength every day in the Soul Society, or anywhere else for that matter. All around them, the thunderous roar of colliding energies filled the air, swallowing up sound and light in a blinding eruption. Where Esdeath's divine flash met Aizen's storm, an incandescent burst of energy painted the sky, illuminating the battlefield in unearthly blue-white brilliance. Ethan's thunder cannon flared in his hands as he unleashed its full power at Esdeath, only to have it pierced and obliterated by her divine flash before it could even reach her. A blinding arc of blue-white lightning smashed the cannon shot apart, its raw force rippling outward like a thunderclap. Ethan staggered back, heart-pounding, as dust and energy danced in the sudden gust. Across the gap, Aizen Sosuke's Composo re-wavered for the first time. He realized at once how dangerously strong Esdeath's counterattack was, and that he couldn't afford another underestimation. Flicking through the pages of his spellbook, he chanted with urgent precision, "Mighty Scion of Heaven, Iron-Walled Citadel, Dragon on the Move, Lion's Roar, Tiger's Might, Wolf's Run, Sever Heaven and Earth at the Brink of Collapse, 81 Fractured Paths, Sky Sunder." The air shimmered, and a colossal, translucent barrier blossomed before Aizen. Pale light pulsed along its surface, promising to halt any assault up to the 89th fracture. Ethan watched breathlessly, hoping it would hold, until Esdeath's divine flash struck once more. The lightning ignored the ward as though it weren't there, crashing into it like an unstoppable spear. Boom! The barrier splintered in an ear-shattering roar, shards of light collapsing inward. A violent shockwave blew Ethan off his feet, sending him tumbling backward into a cloud of dust. When the debris settled, Aizen was on his knees, the remnants of his defense flickering out. Ethan scrambled to his feet, knowing the true battle had only just begun. Smoke and ash choked the sky, blotting out the sun as though the world were crumbling. At the instant the heavens seemed to sunder, Aizen Sosuke slipped away from the epicenter, his brow furrowed, eyes alight with curiosity and unease. He paused a dozen paces off, lifting a hand to sift through the drifting grit and strain his senses. The residual Reiatsu struck him like a phantom afterimage, familiar as a virtual flash, yet utterly different in substance. "A virtual flash?" he murmured, voice low and uncertain. He tested it again, reaching deeper, and found no hint of imitation or mask. This was no mere copy of speed or illusion. It bore its own terrifying signature, a concentrated, destructive force that snapped through barriers like bamboo under a swing of steel. This was special spiritual pressure. Before Aizen could gather more of his thoughts, a calm male voice echoed through the haze. "It's the power of destruction." Head swiveled toward the speaker, Ethan, whose steady gaze cut through the swirling dust. Kiraku Shunsui's eyebrows rose beneath his straw hat. "The power of destruction?" he asked, disbelief tinging his tone. Ethan nodded, every syllable deliberate. "Yes," he confirmed, "the power of destruction." Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of settling ash, as those present realized they were facing something far beyond any conventional threat. "We are the gods of destruction," Ethan declared, his voice carrying an unearthly calm. "Our power of annihilation is nothing like your Shinigami, Hollows, or Quincy. With our spiritual pressure, we can obliterate any spiritual being instantly. Next to a god of destruction, your Reiatsu is meaningless." His words hit the onlookers like a bombshell. No one could fathom anyone or anything capable of tearing apart Reishi, the fundamental particles that composed every soul and object in their world. "Destroy Reishi itself?" murmured one shocked captain. "That's like erasing atoms." And yet, the evidence lay before them in smoking ruins. The runaway torrent of raw energy had not only shattered Duan Kong's formidable defenses, but had gone further, annihilating Reishi at its very core. Such destructive force was the stuff of nightmares, far beyond even the Quincy's famed annihilation techniques. "Not even the Quincy's can rival this," someone whispered in awe. Standing slightly apart, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni tightened his grip on his sword's hilt. He recalled that the Quincy drew their power from the Soul King himself, the same Soul King whose Quincy abilities had once slain the greatest monarch of history. Yet even those legendary powers paled in comparison to the ruthless finality on display here. A heavy silence fell over the gathered captains and lieutenants. If a god of destruction truly wielded this level of power, what hope remained for the worlds they had sworn to protect? Aizen Sosuke fell silent. Lost, hot. Virtual opponents, could their origins mirror those of the gods of destruction? The godly figure itself and the raw power of destruction, might they spring from the same source? Chapter 7 and 26. Ethan's desperate struggle. Ethan stared at his opponent, mind racing. He had no frame of reference for this strange power of destruction, and no idea how to counter it. He scrambled to form a protective chant, pouring every ounce of Reiatsu into a barrier he hoped would hold. But the moment Esdeath unleashed her god flash, his defenses shattered like a sandcastle under a rising tide. In all the battles he'd fought as a death god, the law was simple. Spiritual pressure determined the outcome. If your Reiatsu was higher than your foes, their attacks couldn't even graze you. Yet this god of destruction defied that rule. Even with his Reiatsu surpassing Esdeath's, Ethan felt the full impact of her strike. It was as if her power delivered true damage, invulnerable to any shield, tearing straight through his defenses. A cold realization gripped him. Everything he'd learned about combat upended in an instant. No longer could he rely on overwhelming spiritual pressure or ironclad wards. The destructive power he faced ignored every conventional defense, rendering him dangerously exposed. As Esdeath advanced with absolute confidence, Ethan knew he had to find a new strategy or be swept away by this unstoppable force. To counter Ethan's overwhelming destructive power, Aizen Sosuke had to pour every ounce of his spiritual pressure into maintaining his defense. Esdeath, intrigued by the struggle, decided to step in, unleashing her divine flash once more in a brilliant arc aimed at Aizen. Over time, she had mastered the secret of converting raw spiritual pressure into devastating force, the very art originally wielded by the Soul King himself. Quincy abilities rely on subtle manipulations of spirit particles to produce destructive energy. Ethan, however, had elevated that technique to an unprecedented level. His sheer command over this refined power set him leagues above any conventional Quincy. In channeling her divine flash, Esdeath was, for all intents and purposes, echoing the true Soul King's might. "Enough, Esdeath," Ethan said coolly, stepping forward. "Let them settle this on their own." Obediently, Esdeath blinked out of existence and reappeared at Ethan's side in an instant. Aizen, still catching his breath, dared no further attack. He stood no chance against Esdeath, let alone against Ethan's perfected power. From the sidelines, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni surveyed the pair with a steely glare before turning his attention back to Aizen Sosuke. The verdict was clear. The traitor had to be dealt with immediately. "Aizen Sosuke, today I swear I will kill you." Genryusai Yamamoto's eyes blazed like twin furnaces. Age had withered his body, but never his indomitable will. His voice rolled across the deserted battlefield, a thunderous promise of the fury to come. Moments before, Yamamoto had chosen caution, conceding that Aizen's anti-Reiatsu membrane was no simple obstacle. But now his restraint was gone. He lifted Zanka no Tachi, his legendary blade glowing in his calloused grip, and unleashed its hidden power. An invisible wave of searing heat surged forward, scorching the ground and igniting the air itself. Aizen felt the inferno bearing down and vanished in an instant. His Shunpo, the very apex of Soul Reaper instant transit, propelled him into the shadows. Yet Yamamoto's senses were unmatched. He tracked Aizen's afterimage without missing a step, each movement as steady and unhurried as a grave marker. So it was that the 1,000-year death god bore down upon the traitor captain, the title of Gotei's mightiest warrior validated in every stride he took. There would be no escape. Today, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni would make Aizen Sosuke truly understand the price of betraying the Soul Society. Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni had perfected every aspect of a Shinigami's art. His strength, speed, and skill were unrivaled. Even an opponent as prodigious as Sosuke Aizen could only hope to challenge him, never to surpass him. Aizen sensed the tide turning against him. He flipped his Zanpakuto upside down, blade, tip aimed toward the ground, preparing to unleash Kyoka Suigetsu once more. But before he could complete the release, Yamamoto was already upon him, his single strike relentless and unhesitating. Confident in his own power, Yamamoto believed he could end Aizen before the illusion technique could even manifest. Aizen's eyes narrowed in alarm. He had never faced speed like this. With no time to spare, he invoked the Shunpo step, the world blurring around him as he narrowly evaded the slash. Still, Yamamoto refused to relent. Even as Aizen sprang away, the old captain deftly sheathed his blade, his gaze never leaving his adversary. The battlefield hung on a knife's edge, each warrior poised for the next decisive move. Ethan's blade didn't kill Aizen Sosuke, but its unleashed force rent the earth in two. In an instant, the ground beneath them was blasted to roughly 15 million degrees. Tens of thousands of tons of soil and rock vaporized on the spot, leaving a smoking chasm where nothing remained. For a heartbeat, even time seemed to halt in awe of that power. Aizen stood at the crater's edge, wide-eyed, a chill creeping up his spine. He'd never encountered an adversary capable of such devastation. In all his years, not even Yamamoto Genusai Shigekuni had struck him so fiercely, and he knew that, if this continued, he might well perish at the Captain Commander's hand. Aizen's gaze drifted to his own Zanpakuto, Kyoka Suigetsu, and he felt the gulf between it and Yamamoto's legendary Ryujin Jako more keenly than ever. If only he wielded Hyorinmaru, the mightiest ice and snow blade of legend, he could stand toe-to-toe with Yamamoto. After all, his spiritual pressure rivaled the Captain Commander's in strength, and his talents matched Yamamoto's in every respect. The only thing he lacked was the true, overwhelming power of his weapon. Janramaru is believed to be the most powerful lightning-type Zanpakuto in existence. In all of Soul Society, the only other blade with true weather control is Hyorinmaru, making Genramaru unique among thunder wielders. Given that singular status, it stands to reason that Genramaru is the strongest lightning Zanpakuto ever forged. With no better option, Sosuke Aizen resorted to Kido. He slammed his palm forward and intoned, "The sigils that veil chaos in shadow, the arrogance of storm and surge laid low, bind, deny, paralyze this slumbering might. Steel-bound wraith, marionette of ruin, constrain, recoil, rend the earth, know your impotence, Kyuju-kyukyu, Kurohitsugi, black coffin." At his command, a colossal black cube erupted from the ground, swallowing Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni whole. The old captain's brow furrowed in concentration as the black coffin's walls began to crackle with obliterating energy, ready to crush its victim in mere moments. Before the spell could complete its deadly work, a single cleaving strike rent the cube in half. Zanka no Tachi, the sword of the scorching heat, had no visible blade of fire, yet anything it touched was instantly reduced to ash. Even Aizen's perfected Kido could not withstand the sword's inexorable purity of flame. The black coffin dissolved like mist under sunlight, and Yamamoto stepped free of its remnants, unscathed and radiating calm fury. Aizen Sosuke's lips curved into a frown. He had intended to trap Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni with his black coffin, but the veteran captain didn't even hesitate. With a single, lightning-fast strike, Yamamoto could reduce any threat to ash. And right now, even if Aizen managed to complete the black coffin's release, it would take too long. The blistering heat was already leaching the moisture from every living thing in the vicinity. Sweat beaded on Aizen's forehead as he felt his strength ebbing away. Facing Yamamoto in full fury was far beyond his current capabilities. He needed more time. Time to unlock the secrets of the Hogyoku, time to understand its true power, before he could dare stand against the Soul Society's mightiest captain. Chapter 7-7. A New Future Unfolds. Aizen Sosuke watched helplessly as Ethan's mechanical deity tore his grand design to shreds. In all his centuries of scheming, he had never encountered such reckless power. With no other options, Aizen could only bide his time. Ethan strolled forward and gave Esdeath a light tap on the shoulder. "Turn on the air conditioner," he said casually. Around them, the temperature still hovered at an impossible 15 million degrees, but Ethan himself felt nothing. Why should he suffer alone when help was literally standing beside him? Esdeath gave him a teasing smile, fully aware that heat was the last thing on his mind. Still, she summoned her chilling aura and unleashed it. A fringe of sub-zero wind curled around Ethan's form, leaving the surrounding inferno untouched. On the scorched ground lay Zaraki Kenpachi, his massive frame sprawled as he slowly stirred awake. "What the hell is this heat?" Kenpachi roared, pushing himself up on one elbow. Yachiru Kusaka was immediately at his side. She hauled him back into Esdeath's frost-wreathed zone. "Big brother Kenpachi, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kenpachi blinked against the glare. I'm fine, he growled, wiping sweat from his brow. He touched his side, surprised to find no fresh blood. Ethan's scorching assault had evaporated every drop the moment it landed, effectively cauterizing Kenpachi's wounds and stopping the bleeding on impact. Esdeath's cool mist swirled around them, creating a fragile sanctuary in the heart of absolute heat. And while Aizen Sosuke seethed at the sight, everyone else could finally catch their breath and wonder what astonishing power Ethan would reveal next. Ethan watched in tense silence as Captain Commander Yamamoto Junryusai Shigekuni bore down on Aizen Sosuke. Aizen didn't dare fight back or even think about releasing Kyoka Suigetsu. If he tried, his Zanpakuto might literally disperse into mist. Yamamoto himself realized how dangerously well-matched Aizen was. Their raw power and swordsmanship were nearly identical. Were it not for the illusory nature of Kyoka Suigetsu, the two would already be locked in a cataclysmic clash capable of tearing the world apart. Off to the side stood Shunsui Kyoraku, his straw hat pulled low, eyes flickering with concern. "Aizen Sosuke," he murmured. He hadn't expected Aizen to hold out so steadily under the full force of Yamamoto's true strength. Though Aizen's composure showed slight cracks, he still sent out phantom strikes now and then. Yamamoto brushed each aside without effort, but the assaults were enough to keep even the legendary captain on guard. Ethan's heart pounded as he took in the scene. He knew that if Aizen found a way to turn the tide, or if Yamamoto's attention wavered for even an instant, the balance of power in the Soul Society could shift forever. And in that moment, neither friend nor foe could predict what would happen next. Yamamoto Junryusai Shigekuni realized this deadlock couldn't hold. He needed to overwhelm Aizen with a single, decisive move. "Zanka no Tachi Resurrection! Shikai!" he bellowed, his Reiatsu spiking as molten flames ignited around him. 15 million-degree fire roared to life, cloaking Yamamoto's body and sword in a searing corona. From this inferno, any opponent daring enough to close in unawares would be reduced to ash in an instant. Aizen's normally inscrutable expression flickered with alarm. Even at a distance, the heat pressed in on him like a living thing, threatening to consume him. Below their feet, the ground cracked and bled molten rock, turning the battlefield into a river of lava that made retreat nearly impossible. But Yamamoto gave his rival no time to reconsider. With a swift, earth-shaking sweep of his blade, he unleashed an even more devastating assault, his fiery blade carving a path of destruction toward Aizen in one blinding arc. Ethan's voice rang out over the ruined field. "Spirits of the fallen, whose ashes were forged in my flames, I summon you. Taste once more the few, rye of combat." He drew a deep breath and intoned the name of his formation. Remnant Fire Chieftain Spell. Fire, fire, 10 trillions Death Burial Formation. At Lord Yamamoto, Junryusai Shigekuni's command, Ethan drove the blade of his residual fire Zanpakuto into the scorched earth. The sword's searing heat flared to life, stirring the ashes of every warrior he had cremated in past battles. From those embers rose an army of charred skeletons, each clutching a rusted weapon, their hollow eye sockets burning with spectral hate. Without hesitation, they surged forward to cut down every foe Yamamoto had marked. Aizen Sosuke watched the skeletal horde advance, his normally inscrutable face touched by a rare flicker of concern. These were not mindless shades, but the remains of powerful fighters, countless in number and driven by an unrelenting spell. He knew better than to underestimate them. From his vantage point, Yamamoto allowed himself a cruel smile. The formation had worked exactly as intended, tightening the noose around Aizen and leaving him with nowhere to turn. Aizen Sosuke kept his distance from the searing heat of the Zanri prison garb, but he couldn't afford to stand by. The skeletal legions that rose from the earth threatened to overwhelm him if he lingered too long. Planting his feet firmly, he watched as bone after bone clattered into place, forming an unending tide of undead. He raised Kyoka Suigetsu, its polished surface catching the faint light, and struck out. Each sweep of the mirror sword sent shards of shattered bones skittering across the ground, and for a moment the skeletons faltered. But they recovered almost instantly, snapping back together with inhuman speed. Worse still, more skeletons burst from the soil, their numbers swelling until Aizen felt the press of bodies at his back. Refusing to yield, Aizen lashed out again and again. Frozen arcs of cold light cut through the nearest foes, forcing them to stumble backward. Just as he thought he'd carved out a safe zone, a colossal skeleton surged to the front. In its bony grasp, it held a massive cleaver, its blades stained with ancient, dust-like residue. Aizen barely had time to react. He raised Kyoka Suigetsu, but in that instant, he realized he had underestimated the skeleton's strength. The cleaver came down in a brutal arc, and Aizen braced himself for impact. Ethan watched with curious detachment as the great blade of Zanka no Tachi, the North, Heaven and Earth Ashes, came crashing down on the skeletal corpse. The impact rang like thunder. Even Aizen Sosuke's hand shook, and his signature technique, Mirror Flower, Water Moon, wavered under the shock. For a heartbeat, he nearly lost his grip on the sword's hilt, but he recovered just in time, forcing the corpse back. Aizen's eyes glittered with contained surprise. "So these things do more than just turn to ash," he muttered, voice low. "Don't stand in my way." He poured more Reiatsu into the blade and sliced clean through the skeleton's spine. Bone shards scattered, and still the fallen figure's hollow eyes followed him, remnants of power lingering in the air. Ethan frowned, turning away from the carnage with a thoughtful tilt of his head. In the manga, these ash zombies were little more than nuisances. Fake Yuwak smashed them apart without effort. Yet here, before his eyes, they had managed to stagger one of the Gotei's most formidable captains. It was clear these corpses were no ordinary simulacra. Before Ethan could draw any further conclusions, a towering figure stepped forward through the circle of undead. Elder Captain Commander Yamamoto Shigekuni Ryujin roared, "Aizen Sosuke! Your reign of terror ends here. I will show no mercy." He raised his staff high overhead, channeling centuries of unrivaled fire energy. The air crackled, then tore open as he unleashed his ultimate strike. Zankendachi, North, Heaven and Earth Ashes. A blade of pure heat lanced out across the battlefield in an instant. Whatever it touched was obliterated, reduced to white-hot ash on contact. The surrounding chaos of the dead shriveled and vanished in blinding flashes, and even the ground itself smoldered in the wake of Yamamoto's final merciless blow. Sosuke Aizen felt an unmistakable threat to his life. In that instant, Captain General Shigekuni Yamamoto's every movement seemed to slow in Aizen's perception. With deliberate calm, Yamamoto raised his massive blade in a languid arc, then brought it down with inexorable force. Time itself felt thick and sluggish. There was no way for Aizen to slip aside in time. His pupils contracted as he steadied himself for the blow. As expected of Captain General Yamamoto, Aizen murmured, every syllable measured. "Very well, then in my Bankai, witness a new beginning, the future." Chapter 728, The Omniscient and Almighty God King. Ethan stood alone in the silent chamber, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Every sword in the Soul Society bears a name and a nature, drawn from the very soul of the god of death himself. It is through knowing that name, and through the whispered communion between Shinigami and Blade, that true power is awakened. Who taught you that your world is the only world? Who said your truths are absolute? The Zanpakuto murmured in a voice like wind through falling leaves. Flowers in a mirror, moon on the water, even these images are but dreams. At once, the air rippled, and Ethan felt the boundaries between reality and illusion begin to dissolve. His blade revealed its three core abilities. 1. Flowers in a mirror, moon on the water, an art of sensory domination that distorts the opponent's perception, trapping them in a web of shifting visions. 2. Name and face remembered, the power to imprint or recall the wielder's identity on any who meet its gaze, binding their consciousness to the sword's will. 3. Dreams made real, the ultimate technique which transforms all unfavorable circumstances into illusions at the moment of activation, then reshapes reality itself to the wielder's advantage. The first two talents left enemies stumbling in phantoms. The third erased the line between what is and what might be. In an instant, hopelessness could be spun into a new beginning. On the far side of the battlefield, Aizen Sosuke watched with a mixture of envy and resignation. He, too, had longed for such mastery over fate, but for him, there had been no other choice. Faced with relentless opponents and the avalanche of his own ambition, this power had become his only refuge. Ethan drew a steady breath, tightening his grip. He had learned the name of his Zanpakuto. He had heard its whisper, and now he carried within him the promise of boundless possibilities and the weight of deciding which dream would become reality. At the pinnacle of Soul Society stood a proud, confident Shinigami, Commander-at-Large Sosuke Aizen, unquestioned in his power and authority. Yet now he found himself driven into a corner, forced to admit defeat and scramble for an escape. All because of Ethan's sudden, unanticipated intervention. This one variable shattered the carefully balanced clash and thrust Aizen into a dilemma he'd never before encountered. Desperate to turn the tide, he activated Kyoka Suigetsu's Shikai, unleashing his signature hypnotic illusion. "Welcome to my Soul Society," Aizen's voice rang out, laced with both mockery and frustration. A dreamlike luminescence flooded the battlefield as Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis took hold. Every surface shimmered as if reality itself was bending. From the rear lines, Yamamoto Shigekuni Genryusai, Captain Commander of the Gotei 13, narrowed his eyes beneath his battered war hat. He lifted his blade, prepared to obliterate Aizen's trickery with the full force of his Bankai, but the swirling ashes of his attack dissolved the instant they appeared. Hypnosis? Yamamoto's deep voice rumbled as he watched the ash vanish into thin air. In that heartbeat, he understood the true danger. Sight and sound could no longer be trusted. Every flicker of color, every echo of steel, each might be a falsehood. A weight unlike any he'd ever felt pressed down on his chest. Behind him, the other captains and lieutenants stifled their surprise, tightening their grips on Zanpakuto hilts. They, too, realized the gulf that had opened between them and Aizen's power. A gulf formed by illusions so perfect they could ensnare even the strongest wills. In that tense silence, the Gotei 13 braced for a battle in which nothing and no one could be taken at face value. They already knew how terrifying Sosuke Aizen's first release, Kyoka Suigetsu, could be. But this new swastika ability? Whispers ran through the ranks. Was it simply Kyoka Suigetsu on a grander scale, an amplified version of Shiji's power? Or had Aizen found an entirely new edge? Whatever the truth, they all agreed on one thing. This ability posed a threat they could not ignore. Under its sway, the Soul Society dissolved into a single, immense dream, where reality and illusion wove together until there was no way to tell them apart. Of course, such power carried a deadly caveat. The dreamlike effect of mirror flowers, water moon, could be invoked only once. The moment Aizen unleashed the swastika, every soul under its spell would abruptly awaken, ending the illusion in an instant. That was why, in the original battle, he had never used this technique. He understood better than anyone that once the swastika was released, he would have only a narrow window to conclude the fight. This time, I failed, Aizen admitted, his gaze drifting to Ethan. Ethan didn't answer. He lifted his chin, staring up at the empty skies, then turned his eyes back to the earth at his feet. Finally, he spoke, quiet but steady. "It's just mirror flowers, water moon on a massive scale. The flowers in the mirror and the moon on the water, nothing but a dream." Esdeath's nostrils flared with contempt. Aizen Sosuke's words, "Welcome to my Soul Society," were not wrong. This twisted realm of illusions was entirely under his control, and that infuriated her. "I hate tricks like this," she muttered, clenching her fists. Standing at her side, Ethan offered calm reassurance. "Use your destruction power to sharpen your vision. In a Shinigami duel, it all comes down to Reiatsu. Your spiritual pressure is stronger than his. Pierce through the illusion by focusing your power." He knew full well that Reiatsu theory didn't apply to everyone, but for a Soul Reaper, the logic held. A stronger pressure would reveal the truth behind deception. Aizen's own Reiatsu had swelled since he bore the dark swastika on his chest, but Esdeath's spiritual power still exceeded his. What she lacked was experience in channeling it to counter illusions. Taking Ethan's advice, Esdeath invoked her destruction ability. Instantly, her vision sharpened and her other senses, hearing, touch, even her Reiatsu perception, grew keen beyond mortal limits. The world around her trembled as the veils of illusion tore away. There, standing before them, was Aizen Sosuke. He glided forward, his signature hollow mask fragment flickering in and out of existence, flanked by Ichimaru Gin and Tosen Kaname. The trio advanced like harbingers of oblivion, and Esdeath's blood boiled with anticipation. "You're late to the party," Aizen drawled, his gaze cutting icily toward Esdeath. Beside her, Ethan straightened, ready to face the enemy's next move. The Soul Society's dreamscape had become a battleground, and now the real fight was about to begin. Even with Kyoka Suigetsu's power to reshape reality, Aizen Sosuke had met his match in Yamamoto Genryusai. No amount of illusion could overcome the Captain Commander's overwhelming Reiatsu, and Aizen knew it. If he'd been capable of defeating Yamamoto outright, he wouldn't have spent all those years engineering the fire-extinguishing prince. Faced with Yamamoto's crushing spiritual pressure, he had no choice but to withdraw and seek greater power for the rematch. "Shall we intervene now?" Esdeath asked Ethan. He shook his head. "Not yet. He's exhausted every trick he has left. We'll wait until he merges with Bengyu." Ethan's gaze drifted to the horizon. Reports from Juba had confirmed that the Soul King himself had locked Aizen's potential at the 5th stage. But even capped there, Aizen's transcendent strength had proven more than enough to unsettle Shinigami, Hollows, and Quincy alike. The Invisible Empire could only stand by in awe and trepidation at the destructive deity they had just witnessed. After Aizen Sosuke vanished, the illusory dreams shattered. One by one, everyone's consciousness snapped back from the Mirror Flower, Water Moon hypnosis. In the future, only Aizen could cast that spell again, but those already on guard would no longer fall victim. A far more intriguing game was about to begin. Before them stood the Stoice, Tyrius gods of destruction. Suspicion and wariness rippled through the assembly. Then a calm, authoritative voice cut the tension. "Rest assured, creations of the Soul King, I mean you no harm." Ethan's words echoed across the silent courtyard. He'd chosen the title, Creations of the Soul King, deliberately, staking a claim to power that rivaled even the divine. Perched on a raised dais, he looked down at the Shinigami arrayed below. Although his tone was gentle, it carried an imperious weight that brooked no challenge. Yamamoto Shigekuni and his fellow captains exchanged uneasy glances. Who were these newcomers calling themselves gods of destruction, and why had they never been mentioned before? Yet in that single phrase, Creations of the Soul King, lay hints of alliances and rivalries none could yet decipher. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he studied Captain Jushiro Ukitake. "Tell me," he said in a low, commanding tone, "are you anything like the Quincy King? I am the God King, omniscient and omnipotent. You, on the other hand, are either a creation of the Soul King or someone who's tapped into his power." A chill ran down Ukitake's spine. He had no idea why Ethan had singled him out, but one thought loomed above all others, the ancient spirit Mimihagi that dwelled within him. Chapter 729, The Realm of the Gods. Deep within Soul Society hides a secret known to no one but the highest ranks, the Soul King. Omniscient and omnipotent, he is far more than a mere ruler. He is the keystone holding the real world, Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo together in perfect balance. Guarded by the elite Squad Zero, he resides in the Soul King's inner palace, a sacred domain so remote and hallowed that even the most senior Shinigami have never laid eyes upon it. Legend credits the Soul King with boundless wisdom and power, each of his decisions rippling outward to shape the destiny of every living being. In the world's earliest days, existence was chaos, without life or death, progress or retreat. Hollows, an integral part of the soul cycle, were meant to dwell alongside human souls in harmony. But over countless ages, those monstrous spirits turned on humanity, devouring souls in a ravenous hunger. That imbalance threatened to engulf all souls, transforming every living spirit into a massive hollow and plunging the three realms into eternal stillness. Now, on the brink of collapse, Soul Society's finest stand ready, if they can only unravel the mystery of the Soul King's power. At the pivotal moment when the realms teetered on the brink of collapse, the Soul King appeared. Wielding the power of absolute annihilation, he wiped out the ravenous hollows one by one, then used what remained of his strength to reboot the cycle of existence. From that point on, the human world, Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo were separated into three distinct planes, each maintaining its own fragile balance. Yamamoto Genryusai, by then the most seasoned captain in Soul Society, understood this secret better than anyone. He knew that it was the Soul King's unrivaled might that had cleaved the original chaos into the three domains, the physical realm of living beings, the spiritual realm of the Shinigami, and the barren desert paradise where the Hollows were exiled. In Yamamoto's view, the Soul King stood at the very apex of power in all creation. Born at the dawn of the universe itself, he was the embodiment of the world's will to impose order on primordial disorder, and the fountainhead from which all other supernatural abilities flowed, from Quincy techniques to Shinigami Zanpakuto to Fullbring. Chapter Text. The cosmos was divided into two realms, the world of chaos and the abyss of hell. The Soul King's existence had been the universe's answer to three dire threats: the voracious hollows, the ever-expanding domain of hell, and the creeping realm of the dead. Now, standing before them all, Ethan proclaimed himself the omniscient, omnipotent God King. His declaration struck the assembled officers like a thunderbolt. Commander Yamamoto Shigekuni's eyes narrowed. He drew a steady breath and spoke in a resonant baritone. Impossible. When the Soul King came into being, there was no God King in this world. Ethan offered a serene smile. Your memory fails you. I was present then, merely concealed from your awareness. And yet you praised us for severing the Soul King's power, the commander pressed. Ethan inclined his head, unfazed by the murmur rippling through the crowd. Precisely. You succeeded admirably, but scarcely anyone here knows the full truth of the Soul King. You all still think this world follows a single, immutable script. He took a deliberate step forward, his voice dropping to a soft, confident timbre. In reality, this world brims with infinite possibilities, and I intend to explore every one. With a casual snap of his fingers, Ethan set his plan into motion, and the very air around them shimmered with boundless potential. When Ethan's fingers brushed the ancient rune, the air itself seemed to shudder. In the distance, the once empty earth began to swell, as if awakened by some titanic force. Slowly, a breathtaking structure emerged, not assembled piece by piece, but unfurling before their eyes like a colossal scroll. Its silhouette sharpened, revealing smooth, graceful lines, and every surface brimming with artistic detail. The central tower soared into the clouds, its peak nearly piercing the blue sky. Bathed in sunlight, the facade gleamed with a golden radiance, as though studded with countless gemstones, so dazzling that no one dared meet its brilliance directly. Yet beyond its outward splendor lay a deeper power, an almost sacred presence that filled everyone with awe, as if they were standing before a palace fit for a god. God's world. The name alone carried a power beyond mere geography, a promise of divinity laid bare. More than a city or a fortress, it was an embodiment of the divine domain, a realm that transcended mortal boundaries. At first glance, no proclamation was needed. The moment anyone beheld those colossal spires and glowing streets, an unspoken truth crystallized in their minds. This was the Lord's own realm. As onlookers stood hushed before its gates, a strange resonance hummed through the air, stirring something deep within their souls. It was as if a sacred spirit had been etched into every stone and street lamp, and that imprint reached out to anyone with the ambition, or the insanity, to claim godhood. Aspirants for the title, God of Destruction, devotees longing to become its hollow, even the Quincy who placed their faith in archery over arcane power, all felt the same magnetic tug. Excitement crackled across the gathered crowd, hearts pounding with the promise of a brand new world swinging its gates wide open. Then, without warning, three figures at the forefront dissolved into light. Ethan, Esdeath, and Kenpachi Zaraki seemed to merge seamlessly with the radiance of God's world, vanishing from sight as though they had never been there. In that stunned silence, the city's true pull became undeniable. Its doors were open, and it was calling for anyone bold enough to step across its threshold. God Realm? Yamamoto Shigekuni stood atop the central cathedral's highest balcony, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the horizon. As Captain Commander of the Soul Society, he fully grasped the danger this new plane posed. For 1,000 years, the Soul Society had preserved the balance of the three realms: Soul Society, the living world, and Hueco Mundo. Now, with the emergence of the God Realm, that fragile equilibrium teetered on the brink of collapse. This was no ordinary territory. The God Realm embodied divine authority itself, a conceptual and physical domain that transcended all known boundaries. And now its gates were flung open, drawing in wayward souls, Shinigami, Hollows, and even Quincy of the highest caliber. What did its arrival signify? A horde of destroyers beyond anything the three realms had ever faced. Yamamoto clenched his fists, envisioning the devastation these forces could unleash. He knew the Soul Society could not remain idle. Yet against a realm born of gods, what strategy could he possibly devise? The enormity of the crisis pressed down on him, and for the first time in centuries, the Captain Commander allowed himself a moment of doubt. What hope did they have against a power that profound? At that moment, scores of restless souls in Rukongai were already making their way into the world of the gods. Drawn by the promise of greater strength and the lure of uncharted realms, they set out on this perilous journey without hesitation. Kenpachi Zaraki, however, didn't concern himself with their ambitions. He only knew that his own surroundings had shifted, and that he now stood on entirely different ground. Chapter 730, Changes in Soul Society. The realm of the gods was nothing like Serete. Here, the air felt impossibly pure, the light softened every edge, and even the wind carried a strange, rhythmic whisper. Zaraki Kenpachi stood alone in this ethereal expanse, his senses alight to a peace and mystery he'd never known. "I will become the god of destruction," he declared, his voice reverberating against unseen walls of power. Esdeath materialized at his side, her expression cool and unreadable. "Becoming a god of destruction isn't nearly that easy, Kenpachi," she replied. "You can't just seize the title by force of will." Kenpachi's grin split his face, eyes blazing with untamed fervor. He'd sacrificed too much and endured too many battles to settle for anything less than absolute supremacy. True, he'd never studied death magic, he knew nothing of ghosts or specters, and his mastery of Shunpo barely scratched 70%. Kido, illusions, spirit arts, he'd never even tried. Yet in his bones he believed that sheer determination could surmount any obstacle. He laughed, a sound wild and full of promise. "Titles are earned through strength," he said, "and I'll train until there's nothing left to train." Before Esdeath could answer, a calm voice pierced the charged silence. "Kenpachi." It was Ethan, stepping forward, his tone carrying the weight of unexpected authority. Ethan raised his hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. In an instant, a blade of pale blue light materialized before Zaraki Kenpachi's eyes, humming softly as it hovered in midair. "If you truly wish to grow stronger," Ethan said in a calm, resonant tone, "take up this soul blade." Without hesitation, Kenpachi reached out and seized the weapon. The moment he gripped its hilt, a curious thrill ran through him, familiar yet wholly unlike any Zanpakuto he'd ever known. "Is this a Zanpakuto?" he rumbled, brow furrowed. Before Ethan could answer, Kusaka Yachiru's clear, sweet voice rang out behind them. "Akin!" Kenpachi spun around, his heart pounding. Yachiru's bright eyes were fixed on him, and in their depths he sensed something profound, something he had never understood. Ethan watched the exchange with a faint, amused smile. When Kenpachi met his gaze, he spoke deliberately. "Remarkable. Yachiru isn't merely an ally, she is your fragmented soul. Now you face a choice. You can abandon your Zanpakuto to keep this soul fragment at your side, or forsake the soul blade and allow your fragment to fully return to you." Kenpachi's grip tightened on the blue blade as the truth washed over him. All this time he had walked beside Yachiru without realizing she was part of his own being. Now, at the threshold of a decision that could reshape his very essence, he had to choose which path to follow, and which weapon would define his future. Ethan stared in disbelief. All this time, the girl at his side, Kusaka Yachiru, had been more than just a companion. She was a fragment of Zaraki Kenpachi himself. The revelation stunned him, and when he glanced at Yachiru, he saw the same confusion reflected in her wide eyes. Both of them understood the gravity of the choice before them. Once made, it couldn't be undone. For a long moment, Kenpachi and Yachiru simply held hands, each searching the other's face for reassurance. Then, with a quiet resolve, Kenpachi released her. He reached for his soul blade, its hilt cold and familiar in his grip, and turned to face Ethan. With every step across the temple's marble floor, his purpose grew clearer. At last, he halted before Ethan and spoke, his voice unwavering and commanding. "I choose to become the god of destruction." The words rang out through the silent temple like a clarion call, firm, irrevocable. Once a fierce war god who revered only strength in combat, Zaraki Kenpachi now stood at the crossroads of his destiny. By his side, Yachiru's innocent eyes glimmered with anticipation. To him, she had long since eclipsed even the power of his Zanpakuto. The blade that had once been the very symbol of his God now felt hollow compared to the bond he shared with her. Kenpachi had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Ethan's resolve never wavered. He was prepared to sacrifice everything, even his own life, to protect the girl who meant more to him than anything else. Listen carefully, Ethan continued, addressing the assembled fighters. Only those who can manifest a soul blade by drawing the sword are eligible to ascend as gods of destruction. Without that ability, you remain an ordinary god, no matter how powerful you believe yourself to be. Kenpachi Zaraki leaned forward, curiosity burning in his eyes. So you're saying that as soon as someone can unsheath this soul blade, they become a god of destruction? Ethan nodded. Esdeath stepped forward and drew her sword. In that instant, her soul blade blossomed into being, an echo of the original Zanpakuto's release. Kenpachi remembered how he'd never managed to free his own Zanpakuto's true form. He'd never taken it seriously enough. But now, under Ethan's instruction, something deep inside him shifted. He wanted that power. He craved it. By drawing the soul blade, Ethan went on, your spiritual pressure begins to transmute into raw destructive force. At first, the power is negligible, but given time, as you master the return blade technique, that force will grow until you stand as a true god of destruction. Kenpachi's grin stretched wider than ever. Esdeath watched Ethan's demonstration with a puzzled expression. She didn't fully grasp the intricacies of his explanation, but she didn't need to understand every detail. Seeing the soul blade in action and feeling the undercurrent of power was proof enough that Ethan's teachings were real. Ethan merely smiled to himself. Words might fall short of complete clarity, but the blade's glow and the warrior's reactions said everything that needed to be said. Kenpachi nodded and glanced at Yachiru Kusaka. Can I have another soul blade? At that, Ethan simply raised his hand, and a second blade coalesced from the surrounding spiritual energy. Yachiru caught it midair, her eyes bright with expectation. Ethan turned back to Kenpachi. Soon, countless souls will pour in, he said. You'll need to decide how to manage them. I've concluded that the god's realm requires a district like Rukongai, but we'll call it Soul City. With that, he effectively handed the entire project over to Kenpachi. The captain bowed in silent agreement, fully aware of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. Meanwhile, in the Seirei, word of Kenpachi's defection sent shockwaves through the ranks. Madarame Ikaku and his fellow officers fell into deep, troubled thought. They had all volunteered as Shinigami under Kenpachi's banner, venerating his strength and spirit. Now that he had abandoned the Soul Society, they faced an impossible choice, but follow him they would. After all, in the entire history of Soul Society, no Shinigami had ever betrayed their own. Yet here they stood, poised to rewrite that legacy. Shinigami who swear themselves to the Soul Society are bound to fight to the death to preserve the cosmic balance. But now, in the wake of shocking upheaval, an unforeseeable choice has presented itself. After long deliberation, Ikaku Madarame and his closest comrades have made a grim decision. They will leave the Soul Society behind and journey into the world of the gods to find Kenpachi Zaraki. They know that by taking this path, they risk everything, honor, rank, even their lives, but they are driven by unshakable faith and the bonds of friendship. When Captain Commander Genryusai Yamamoto first learned of their intentions, he neither railed against them nor ordered their arrest. Instead, he bowed to the will of Ethan, the omniscient and omnipotent God King, and silently erased their names from the Soul Society's rolls. The move was as devastating as it was inevitable. The central 46 chambers lie in ruins, slaughtered by Sosuke Aizen, and no new elders have been appointed to fill the void. With the council gone, and no guiding hand, to steer it, the Soul Society has entered a period of disarray, and Yamamoto, mindful of the fragile balance he still must uphold, refuses to act rashly. Ichigo Kurosaki and his companions have witnessed these cataclysmic changes firsthand. Watching once stalwart allies depart, seeing the very bedrock of their world destroyed, and feeling the currents of fate pull them in new directions, it all struck them like a thunderclap. Now, as the Soul Society stands on the brink of an uncertain future, they can only steel themselves for the trials ahead. Chapter 731, Opposites. After their harrowing journey, Yorichi finally returned from Shifengyuan bearing earth-shaking revelations. She brought back not only intelligence on the all-seeing God King Ethan and the god of destruction Esdeath, but also the first true account of the mysterious realm of the gods themselves. For Urahara Kisuke, a former prodigy of the Seireitai's Technology Development Bureau who has always balanced boundless curiosity with keen vigilance, this news hit like a bombshell. Yorichi's report began with Aizen Sosuke. She told how he had been nearly unmasked in the Soul Society and forced to unleash his Bankai simply to buy his escape. At that, a flicker of relief crossed Urahara's face. If even Aizen could be driven to desperation, perhaps their greatest hidden threat had met his match. But that hope vanished the instant Yorichi spoke Ethan's name. Urahara's brow furrowed, and a shadow passed over his eyes. Confronted with something utterly beyond their experience, he felt that all too familiar stirrings of dread and uncertainty. Urahara Kisuke stood at the edge of the cavernous chamber, his ever-present laid-back smile gone. Before him hovered the newly arrived God King, now known as Ethan, an entity whose vast power flickered like distant stars in a midnight sky. Urahara's mind raced. Omniscience and omnipotence, two words that meant boundless potential, yes, but also infinite peril. If Ethan's motives proved anything but benevolent, the repercussions for both the human world and the Soul Society could be catastrophic. He recalled every legend of deities who'd fallen from grace. Once such limitless ability slipped into dangerous hands, no barrier, spiritual or physical, could stand. A cold knot of worry tightened in his chest. What if Ethan had come not to guide or safeguard, but to conquer? Meanwhile, Kurosaki Ichigo and his friends, who had been summoned here alongside Urahara, exchanged wide-eyed glances. Shock vied with wonder in their expressions. Ichigo, in particular, felt a spark of excitement. A realm governed by a true god, full of mysteries, unseen landscapes, incomprehensible power. What an adventure that must be! His imagination soared. Brilliant skies spun with silver threads of Reiatsu, floating isles guarded by celestial beasts, libraries containing every secret of existence. Yet reality intervened. Their time in the Soul Society was never meant to be permanent. As living beings, their bodies would wither if they lingered too long among the spirits. No matter how tempted they were to chase the dream of crossing into the God world, duty and biology demanded their return. A gentle pulse of spiritual energy swept through the chamber, the signal that their journey home had begun. Urahara bowed slightly to Ethan, masking his concerns behind a polite nod. Ichigo and the others clenched their fists in farewell, hearts heavy with unanswered questions, but resolute to protect the worlds they knew. In an instant, the chamber dissolved into brilliant light. When they opened their eyes again, they stood back in the familiar streets of the living world, souls intact, memories vivid, and a newfound determination kindling within them. The mystery of God King Ethan remained, but now it was theirs to solve another day. Deep within Hueco Mundo, in the soaring spires of the Hueco Night Palace, Aizen Sosuke sat upon his ebony throne, his dark eyes narrowed, as if they could penetrate the very fabric of space and spy on every corner of the Soul Society. His fingertips tapped the polished armrests in a quiet, relentless rhythm that stood in stark contrast to the stillness of the vast hall. Although he had always prided himself on his brilliance, confident that no mind or blade could rival his, today his heart churned with a turmoil he had never before known. Just moments earlier, his spy's report had reached him. There existed an omniscient, omnipotent sovereign known as the God King Ethan. The name struck Aizen like a bolt of lightning tearing through a midnight sky. A being capable of predicting every ove, and controlling every outcome was a threat beyond calculation. Doubts crawled into his mind. Could his intellect still outmaneuver such prescience? Were his elaborate schemes destined to collapse before they even began? Was it folly to press on at all? He leaned forward, spreading the intelligence dossier across his lap. Every page, every ciphered seal, became a desperate hunt for a flaw, a single chink in Ethan's divine armor that might restore Aizen's confidence and tipping the scales back in his favor. Ethan discovered that the God's realm is a hidden domain accessible only to those elevated to godhood. Its every law and decree is shaped by the God King Ethan himself. When a soul enters this realm, it's granted a soul blade, both a badge of rank and the source of its power. Within the gods' realm, these souls become common gods, granted immense strength and lofty status. Those who fail the realm's rigorous selection are banished to the outskirts, to a settlement known as Soul City. There, stripped of divine power and prestige, they nonetheless can live, reproduce, and carve out a life of relative freedom. Sosuke Aizen realized what this means for the future of the Soul Society, a stark division. On one side stands the Soul King, the ultimate arbiter of its laws and the guarantor of its stability. On the other looms the God's realm, ruled by the omnipotent God King Ethan, whose extraordinary power and wisdom will determine the fate of all souls. The coming clash between these two titanic forces will decide the fate of the entire Soul Society. Aizen Sosuke knows that the devastation ahead will eclipse anything the realms have ever seen, shattering its denizens and unraveling even his most carefully laid schemes. Yet a far greater threat looms in the form of God King Ethan. Omniscient and omnipotent, Ethan wields power and insight beyond mortal comprehension. He anticipates every move and bends reality to his will. Standing in his presence, Aizen feels infinitely small, a mere actor before an omnipresent director. In their brief encounter, Aizen's keen mind devoured countless revelations. This world is richer, deeper, and more complex than he ever imagined, and the strengths he once relied upon are woefully inadequate here. Now he must cast aside old certainties. No longer can he depend on sheer force or cunning alone. He needs a fresh approach, one capable of piercing Ethan's foresight and disrupting the God King's designs. With determination sharpening his intellect, Aizen begins to re-examine every facet of his power and strategy. The war for the Soul Society's future has begun, and only by reinventing himself can he hope to challenge the omnipotent Ethan. He knew that the arrival of this God King would profoundly disrupt his own schemes. Standing idly by was not an option, yet neither was rushing in headlong. He needed a way to protect his interests while countering God King Ethan's growing influence. But Sosuke Aizen also understood that, at this moment, he lacked both the means and the plan to confront Ethan directly. He dared not underestimate his rival, nor could he afford blind confidence. What he needed, above all, was a deeper mastery of the Hogyoku's potential, a way to tip the scales in his favor. Until he mastered the threshold of the Death God and unlocked new, transcendent power, any attempt to challenge God King Ethan would be nothing more than wasted effort against an enemy who, for now, was unbeatable. The secret to earning the so-called Soul Passer rank was deceptively simple: eliminate the truly malevolent souls. Those who fell short became ordinary gods. This was why the divine realm had remained so quiet at first. Then, almost overnight, more than 1,000 middling gods filled its ranks, each granted status despite lacking the ferocity needed to ascend further. For Aizen, the path forward was clear: delve deeper into the Hogyoku's mysteries, break his own divine limits, and prepare himself to face God King Ethan on equal footing. Only then would victory cease to be an impossible dream. Ethan achieved this by pruning away the part of his soul that lacked any combat potential. Otherwise, it would have simply lingered. Their techniques themselves are deceptively simple. They're all versions of divine light. What as Death once called divine flash has now been elevated to light of the god of destruction, or sometimes flash of the god of destruction. Even the ordinary god's divine light is astonishingly potent, for it carries within it minute, sometimes almost imperceptible, traces of raw, destructive energy. Chapter 732, Entering the Realm of the Gods. Ethan studied the most basic manifestation of divine power, what he came to call the sand-laced water jet. By infusing ordinary water with countless microscopic grains of sand, the stream could slice through solid iron as though it were mud. In that moment, he understood why divine light was feared even among the lesser deities. Its sheer destructive force was beyond anything mortals or spirits had ever witnessed. No god, whether death deity, hollow, Quincy, or perfectionist, could casually shrug off the power of divine light. But raw power alone wasn't enough. Every major faction had its own method of movement. Hollows drifted aimlessly, Arrancar moved with controlled strides, Shinigami relied on Shunpo, and Quincy took to the air with their flying legs. Gods, he reasoned, must possess an even more advanced technique. After days of tinkering, Ethan finally unlocked what he called Flash, an ability to traverse a set distance in the blink of an eye. A truly powerful god could dash from the Seirete to the realm of the gods in a heartbeat, and even across short distances, Flash was almost impossible to track or intercept. Drawing inspiration from familiar summoner and hero abilities, Ethan synthesized a suite of new god-class skills. Some forged protective barriers to shield the user or allies. Others, he named them punishments, condensed raw destructive force into lethal strikes. Yet, in his own secret tests, none of these inventions came close to matching the elegant potency of divine light itself. For sheer, unmitigated devastation, Ethan knew nothing surpassed the radiant fury of a god's true birthright. Ethan studied the array of divine abilities laid out before him. Divine light, he noted, excelled in raw destructive power, while punishment inflicted true, lasting damage. Its reach and force didn't match divine light's spectacular display, but what it lacked in Flash, it made up for in effectiveness. Weakness bound an opponent's spirit, as though ensnared in unbreakable chains. Teleportation, of course, allowed instantaneous travel over vast distances. Therapeutics healed wounds and cured poisons. Each skill served its purpose. If a god could master them all, along with the Soul Blade's twin boosts, draw sword and return blade, they would become supremely well-rounded and nearly unstoppable. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the divine realm, Madarame Ikaku, Gongchen, and a handful of others stepped through a softly glowing portal, hearts pounding with anticipation. They had endured months of rigorous trials and training to earn the right to enter this sacred world. Now that they were here, their breath caught at the sight before them. A colossal temple rising from the ground like a mountain of pearl, its spires piercing a sky swirling with ethereal clouds. A hush fell over the group as they took in the temple's shimmering facade and the faint hum of divine energy that thrummed in the air. It felt as if the very atmosphere pulsed with untapped potential, promising boundless opportunity and peril to anyone bold enough to seek it out. As they exchanged eager glances, each of them understood that their lives had changed forever the moment they crossed this threshold. In the temple courtyard, Ethan stood alone, the formidable captain, motionless and silent. When Ikaku Madarame and the others stepped into view, surprise flickered across his face. He hadn't expected his subordinates to follow him into the realm of the gods. Then, almost at once, a grin curved his lips. "So you actually chased me here?" "Captain, don't even think about abandoning us," Ikaku shouted, his eyes blazing with determination. "We want to grow stronger by your side." "That's right," the others chimed in, each an elite member of Squad 11. They had willingly left their familiar Zanpakuto behind and forged brand new soul blades, knowing that only by mastering this divine weaponry could they truly integrate into the world of the gods. They hungered for the chance to strike with a power unfiltered to prove themselves as mighty warriors in this strange realm. Ethan offered a slight nod, the corners of his mouth lifting in approval. In that moment, captain and crew alike understood. Their journey had only just begun. Under Kenpachi Zaraki's relentless tutelage, Ethan and the others began to unravel the mysteries of the Soul Blade, a weapon that, while bearing a superficial resemblance to the Zanpakuto, was far more arcane in origin and power. Forged by the omnipotent God King himself, the Soul Blade dwarfed anything the God of Death could produce. Though it shared the Zanpakuto's principle, that a blade is born from its wielder's spirit, the Soul Blade awakened by an entirely different, far more demanding path. Each practitioner must coax its power into full bloom through unceasing training and real combat. Only by pushing themselves to the limit can they peel back the layers of their own potential and manifest the abilities they truly crave. For veterans like Ikaku Madarame and the rest of the squad, this was a chance at redemption. Their original Zanpakuto powers had either failed to match their ambitions or simply fallen short. Now, under Zaraki's watchful eye, they dared to hope for something stronger, something that would finally feel like their own. "Remember this," Kenpachi intoned, sweeping his gaze across the assembled fighters. "Unsheathing your soul blade is the key to transcending your mortal bounds. Only when you draw it can you truly step into the realm of the divine, and in so doing, claim the title of a god of destruction." With that, he raised his own massive blade in demonstration, steel flashing with a power beyond comprehension. Train hard, fight harder, and when the moment comes, draw your sword without hesitation. And with that challenge echoing in their hearts, Ethan and his comrades prepared to take the next step on the road to godhood. Ethan, you already wielded the power of destruction back then. Even the faintest spark of that power still marks you as a destroyer. There's no sharp line between an ordinary god and a god of destruction. What matters is the sheer volume of destructive energy you can unleash. But that measure alone isn't absolute. Every being carries a different total of spiritual pressure. A mortal with colossal reserves, if he channels even 1% of it into destructive force, could overwhelm gods who've only achieved a 50% transformation. Such imbalances are inevitable. Some are born with overwhelming spiritual pressure. Others barely register. Mastering the blade's return remains a path Esdeath herself has yet to complete. We've heard Zaraki Kenpachi speak of Esdeath and Madarame Kazuo, though none of us has ever laid eyes on them. Tales of the Battle of the Two Deaths have spread across the realms. After all, Esdeath was the first god of destruction ever shaped by the omnipotent god king. If one could reclaim the edge, then in a single stride a god could soar to the heavens and be reborn as the god of destruction. Madarame Ikaku and the others stared in disbelief at the thought. To learn that this budding god of destruction might already outmatch Captain Death, and perhaps even the legendary great god of destruction, was both thrilling and terrifying. Such power was their deepest aspiration, yet none could deny how steep the path to that pinnacle would be. In the days that followed, they donned the divine robes granted only to gods. From a distance, these gleaming white garments might have looked like the black death suits worn by the soul reincarnation Shinigami, but their similarities ended there. By channeling spiritual pressure into the fabric, each robe grew tougher, nearly impervious to harm. Their defensive efficiency far outstripped any barrier the wearer could muster alone. Though the design bore a faint resemblance to a Rancor attire, it married elegance and function in perfect balance, truly the ideal gear for those who would claim godhood. Ethan stood before a polished rack of divine uniforms, each garment cut in a sharply tailored, Milita, Rai-inspired style. The jackets were crisply fitted, with smooth, decisive lines that conveyed both authority and precision, an aesthetic not unlike famed elite uniforms of legend. As Ethan slid the jacket on, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was no mere costume, but the official attire of a god's enforcer. Not far away, Ikaku Madarame tightened the straps on his own uniform while chatting with Renji Abarai and Yumichika Ayasegawa. They, too, had just been promoted into the ranks of the God World's peacekeepers. Their first orders of business were already clear: patrol the streets of Seoul City, uphold divine law, and drive out any wayward spirits who sowed discord or preyed on the weak. Occasionally, souls so malevolent or so intent on invading the city's defenses would have to be eliminated outright. It was grim work, but essential if the fragile balance between worlds was to be maintained. Beyond security duties, Ethan and his new comrades were tasked with scouting promising souls, those with untapped potential to become future gods. Guided by senior deities, the team would invite these recruits back to the God World for training and mentorship. Through every patrol, every skirmish, and every recruitment mission, Ethan felt himself growing more attuned to the rhythms of divine life. He was learning how the God World operated, its rules, its hidden machinery, and the responsibility that came with wielding such power. Day by day, he was shedding his former humanity and embracing the role of an ordinary god, resolute, vigilant, and ready for whatever challenge came next. Chapter 733. The Response of the Seirete and the Invisible Empire. Deep within the Soul Society, shrouded by layers of secrecy and shadow, the Invisible Empire moves like a pack of stalking cheetahs. From their hidden vantage points, they watch every ripple in the spiritual winds, every flutter of the grass, seeking signs of change in the world above. Their keen gazes pierce storm clouds, span vast distances, and ultimately fix upon a place whispered about in both dread and wonder, the God World. News of this new realm raced through the empire like wildfire. Rumors spoke of ordinary souls suddenly wielding extraordinary power, of a stage set to reshape reality itself. For the Quincy conspirators of the Invisible Empire, the God World's emergence sparked more than fascination. It sowed deep unease. For years, they had labored in secret, amassing strength and waiting for the moment to overturn the established order, to eradicate the death gods and rebuild existence in their own vision. Now, like a meteor crashing from the heavens, the arrival of the God World threatened to upend every plan they had so painstakingly laid. And so, in the hidden depths of the Soul Society, the Empire's leaders gather. Their whispered council, once brimming with confident strategy, now trembles on the brink of uncertainty. As the God World's influence spreads, every silent footstep, every guarded glance, carries the weight of a future none can yet predict. Chapter 7. A Fracturing Alliance. Ethan sat among the robed figures of the Stern Cross, the Invisible Empire's inner council, as they gathered beneath the vaulted ceiling of their secret meeting hall. Flickering crystal sconces cast shifting shadows across marble pillars, underscoring the gravity of the crisis they faced. At the head of the chamber stood Hasward, the Empire's current leader. With measured calm, he raised a gloved hand to silence the murmurs. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice resonating through the hall, "our course must remain steady. We have waited these centuries for the return and awakening of His Majesty Yuhabaksh. Now is not the hour for reckless gambits. If we abandon our long-term plans in haste, all we have built will collapse." A sharp murmur of dissent ran through the council. Lord Atheris, his tone urgent, leaned forward. "The God World has appeared once again," Atheris insisted. "This is our moment. If we strike now, we could claim its power before the God of Death or the Soul King stirs. We'd gain an advantage no other realm can contest." Hasward's eyes narrowed. "And you underestimate the dangers," he replied. "Stories warn of unpredictable hazards in the God World. Our legions, as formidable as they are, lack both the knowledge and the strength to navigate those unknowns. Worse still, any overt action might draw the direct, perhaps immediate attention of the God King himself." Ethan watched the exchange in silence, weighing both sides. The Empire's patience, honed over millennia, demanded they hold fast. Yet the allure of untapped divine power tugged at his ambition. He traced a pattern in the obsidian surface of the council table, heart-pounding as he considered his own place in the looming conflict. Behind him, the debate grew heated. Some speakers called for compromise, sending a small advance party to scout the God World while the Empire maintained its defensive posture. Others warned that even a single expedition risked discovery and retaliation. When the shouting finally subsided, Hasward spoke again, his voice resolute. "We will not be the first to leap blindly into the abyss. I propose we send no forces until we recover more intelligence and until Yuhabak returns in glory to lead us. Stay your ambition, temper your boldness. That is the only path to true victory." A hush fell over the hall. Ethan drew in a slow breath, torn between loyalty and the promise of power beyond imagining. As the Stern Cross cast their votes, he realized that whichever decision prevailed, the Invisible Empire would be forever changed, and so would he. At his moment, Hashwald knew that any reckless move could draw the God King's ire and doom the Invisible Empire. Anxiety churned in his chest. Had the God King already learned of their hidden realm? If so, were their every action now unfolding under his all-seeing gaze? The possibility left Hashwald both fearful and uncertain where to turn. Then he recalled what Ethan had said during their last meeting, that even Quincy's could travel to the God World and choose to ascend as gods of destruction. At the time, Hashwald had brushed the remark aside, but now, in hindsight, it struck him as oddly pointed. Why single out the Quincy's in the Soul Society, a realm supposedly inhabited only by soul reapers and wandering spirits? Could Ethan have uncovered the Invisible Empire's secret? And if so, why veil his discovery in such a cryptic hint? These questions swirled through Hashwald's mind, refusing to let him rest. For the next several days, he went about his duties in a daze, lost in uneasy speculation, but found no answers. Ethan replayed every moment of the past in his mind, hunting for clues or revelations he might have missed. Finally, he reached a clear decision. He would continue to wait for His Majesty Yuhabak's return and reawakening. In the meantime, he and his allies would maintain constant vigilance over the God World, ready to respond to any threat at a moment's notice. Only by doing so could they ensure that the future of the invisible empire remained secure. Although the Soul Society has long kept an eye on the God world, its agents cannot enter directly. They must rely on information trickling through Soul City to piece together what lies beyond. According to the latest census conducted by the 12th Division, more than 100,000 souls have already fled Rukongai for Soul City. In the past, the 12th Division paid scant attention to these figures. They intervened only when hollows emerged, and, to maintain balance among the three realms, they sometimes exterminated tens of thousands of souls in Hueco Mundo whenever hollow numbers grew too low. Now, however, faced with this unprecedented exodus from Rukongai, they have no choice but to take stock. Exactly how many souls have arrived in Soul City, and why have they come? Captain Yamamoto pressed his palms together behind his back, his brow furrowed in frustration. Given the circumstances, he said, wouldn't it have been wiser to block their departure from the outset? Prevent them from ever reaching the God world? He shook his head. You know why we didn't. I ordered no interception. All we can do now is tally the souls we've lost. Mayuri Kurotsuchi folded his arms, tapping a finger against his chin. What Soul Society needs most are ryukan, wandering souls, both in the streets of Seirete and scattered across the empty world. Until now, they wandered aimlessly, but with the emergence of the God world, they suddenly have a destination. Every one of them wants to go there and become a destroyer. He gave a wry grin. Heaven knows what that actually means to them. Yamamoto let out a long, weary sigh. The number has already ballooned beyond our worst fears. Mayuri scoffed. If we do nothing, they'll surpass 1 million in no time. How many of these wanderers will actually achieve the power of a destroyer? We don't know. From the few destroyers we've encountered on missions, it's clear there are plenty, though their true strength remains a mystery. I refuse to send our Shinigami into blind skirmishes just to gauge their power. We'd risk needless conflict. Yamamoto's gaze drifted toward the distant horizon, where the boundary between worlds shimmered. The departure of so many ryukan will shake our foundations, he admitted softly, and we're powerless to stop it, at least for now. The Soul Society has never fielded more than 10,000 Shinigami at any one time, yet their ranks are thinning at an alarming pace. Losses occur almost daily. In earlier eras, before the rise of the Zanpakuto and the establishment of modern command structures, casualties were even severe. Whole squadrons could be wiped out in a single engagement. There were occasions when a Griffin-class hollow threatened entire districts until the Royal Guard's Zero Division was dispatched to contain it, a measure recorded in our history books as nothing short of extraordinary. But those days of improvisation are gone. Our warriors have grown stronger, and our strategies more refined, so encounters that once demanded the might of a vice-captain now fall easily to a single seasoned officer. Larger, more dangerous Jillian-class hollows pose little more than a nuisance. What remains unchanged, however, is the relentless drain on our manpower. Without a steady flow of new recruits, the Soul Society's lifeblood will simply run dry. If we can't replenish our forces, Mayuri Kurotsuchi remarked, tapping his chin thoughtfully, the Soul Society is doomed to collapse. I understand, said Captain Yamamoto, his voice as calm and steady as the embers of his ever-burning blade. He watched the empty space before him, anticipating a response from the Zero Division. In all likelihood, they would soon deploy one of their elite envoys to investigate this mysterious disturbance in the God world, and perhaps, in doing so, uncover a path to salvation for the Soul Society they all swore to protect. In fact, it would have been odd if Squad Zero hadn't shown any interest in the arrival of a God King who claimed to be every bit as omniscient and omnipotent as the Soul King. Chapter 734, Summoning a School of Catfish to Revive Sosuke Aizen. Esdeath's mastery over her Corpse Mountain, Sea of Blood technique had reached an almost instinctive level. She no longer needed to think through each motion or calculate the rise and fall of every crimson wave. Her blade and the slaughter it wrought had become extensions of her very body. She could leave the sword planted where it stood, letting the heaped corpses and rivers of blood remain undisturbed after each deadly strike. Yet despite her effortless command of that devastating art, Esdeath remained utterly perplexed by the so-called return blade. In the world of the Arrancar, the return blade allows an espada to shed its humanoid guise and revert to its original hollow form, unleashing tremendous power. The return of the god of destruction was analogous. It would let a soul blade shed its current shape and revert to its true essence, much as Sosuke Aizen would later fuse completely with Kyoka Suigetsu to transcend his limits. But for Esdeath, learning to wield this ability was like stepping into uncharted territory. No matter how many mountains of corpses she raised or seas of blood she commanded, she still had no clue how to coax her blade back to its primordial root. The prospect of mastering this lost art both intrigued and frustrated her in equal measure. Esdeath had practiced the technique countless times, but she still couldn't master it. On the surface, the drawn blade and the return blade shared the same origin, but in reality, they were fundamentally different. According to Ethan, a drawn blade's raw power could rival or even exceed that of Captain Death and Vashtoad-class Arrancars. As for Guy-Ren, he was thrown into battles against twisted foes like Captain Death and the notorious Team Zero. The destructive force channeled by the great god of destruction simply overwhelmed everything in its path. It was all a matter of spirit child mechanics. No matter how elaborate the rules or abilities, once you obliterated the spirit child and its framework, it collapsed into utter nothingness. Its sole weakness was that its destructive energy took time to regenerate, but that was hardly a drawback when you could erase entire armies in an instant. Return Blade, what exactly are you? Esdeath murmured to herself, eyes fixed on the weapon in her hand. Around her lay a mountain of bodies, blood pooling in every direction. The blade felt almost alive, throbbing with potential, but she couldn't coax it into unleashing its full might. A flicker of frustration crossed her eyes, but beneath it lay something stronger still, determination. Whatever the return blade was, she would bend it to her will, and she would not rest until she had mastered every ounce of its power. Ethan studied Esdeath with a steady gaze. "I want you to go to Hueco Mundo," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Use the mountains of corpses and the seas of blood to hone your strength." Esdeath inclined her head. Ethan offered a faint smile, then extended his hand and traced a pattern in the air. At once, a shimmering gateway tore open the void before them, a portal of his own design, untraceable by any magic or spirit power, leading directly into Ikomundo and bypassing the broken world's barriers. "Through this gate," Ethan explained, "no spell can follow, no spirit king can intervene. Once you step inside, you'll be truly on your own." Esdeath's dark eyes gleamed with anticipation. Ethan continued, "While you're there, seek out Aizen Sosuke. Give him a little excitement, shake him out of whatever hiding place he's crawled into." She offered a sharp nod, the corners of her lips curling into a confident smile. Without another word, Esdeath vanished into the portal's swirl of silver light. Ethan watched the gateway close behind her, leaving only the hush of the void in its wake. Hueco Mundo spread before Esdeath like a canvas of nightmares. Jagged black spires rose from a pale gray ground, and acidic rivers wound through fields of bleached bones. The air was thick with unknowable energies, creatures both monstrous and ethereal drifting through the mists. Every shadow seemed to ripple with potential threats. Perfect. This was the crucible she craved. Drawing upon her power, Esdeath raised one hand. The mountains of corpses, an army of spectral warriors bound forever to her will, materialized around her, their silent forms bristling with deathly intent. At her feet, the seas of blood churned, tendrils of crimson mist ready to engulf any foe. Here, in this hostile realm of hollow spirits and fierce hollows, she would test the limits of her command. And somewhere beyond the ash-filled skies, Aizen Sosuke would soon learn that Esdeath did not come to parley, she came to conquer. Chapter 10: Descent into Hueco Mundo. Esdeath's power shines brightly against the bleak expanse of Hueco Mundo. Standing atop a hill of shattered corpses and blood-soaked earth, she sweeps her arm, and a tide of bone and gore crashes forward. With unstoppable speed and precision, she cleaves through every hollow that dares stand in her way. They shatter like porcelain beneath her blade, lambs led to the slaughter. Yet Esdeath's eyes burn with restless hunger. This display of strength, impressive though it is, falls short of awakening her true potential. The vast necropolis of corpses and the boundless sea of blood here should offer more than mere fodder. She needs an adversary worthy of igniting her deepest reserves of power. Without hesitation, Esdeath plunges deeper into the abyssal landscape. The ground trembles under her footsteps. The sky itself groans in anticipation. There, in the dim red light, she encounters hollows unlike any she has faced before, hulking behemoths with twisted intelligence. These creatures blend ferocity with cunning, launching coordinated assaults that test every ounce of her skill. Esdeath's lips curl into a fierce smile. At last, a challenge. Gathering the mountain of corpses and the swirling sea of blood around her, she hurls herself into battle. Blade and bone clash, blood and shadow dance in the dim glow, and the roar of combat echoes through the cavernous wastes. Each strike from Esdeath is a promise of oblivion, each counter from the hollows, a daring attempt to match her fury. Meanwhile, in the higher realms, the ordinary gods have received new orders. They are to scour Hueco Mundo for these newly awakened sentient hollows, seeking out any being capable of rivaling Esdeath's might. Those they identify will be brought back to the Celestial Court as candidates for the next god of destruction. Thus, the hunt begins on two fronts. In the abyssal darkness where Esdeath tests her mettle, and in the luminous halls where divinity judges potential. In the heart of Hueco Mundo, blood and bones swirl in a crimson storm. And somewhere within that chaos, Esdeath waits, hungry, unyielding, determined to discover just how far her power can take her. Ethan leaned against the railing of the patrol ship, watching Madarame Ikaku and Captain Zaraki Kenpachi burst into the briefing room, eyes blazing with excitement. The word on everyone's lips was Hueco Mundo, and for two warriors who lived for nothing more than a good fight, it was impossible to turn down. "Captain, let us come too," Ikaku cried, balled fists held high. Kenpachi's lips curved into his familiar grin. He'd dreamed of setting foot in Hueco Mundo ever since he'd heard legends of its hidden horrors and its endless opportunities for battle. In the past, any request to enter had been denied in the name of preserving the balance among the three realms. Kenpachi never understood such politics, and frankly, he didn't care. Leave the delicate juggling of God world and soul society to those who lived for bureaucracy. He answered only to the thrill of combat. Ethan watched them with a touch of envy. As a newer member of the squad, he'd scarcely had a taste of real hollow territory. Not on this scale, at any rate. But now, they were all being summoned to journey to Hueco Mundo, that shadowy expanse wedged between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. It was said to be home to countless hollows of every shape and size, some strange and pitiful, others savage and cunning. Lately, however, a new threat had emerged. Uninvited intruders, ordinary gods and even gods of destruction, had begun pouring into Hueco Mundo. Their onslaught had swept through the desert plains and cavernous strongholds like a whirlwind, shattering the fragile equilibrium that once held the realm in uneasy peace. Wherever these gods set foot, hollows cowered or attacked with unprecedented ferocity. "Let them try," Kenpachi rumbled, cracking his knuckles. "This time, we'll show them what true power looks like." Ikaku echoed his enthusiasm with a laugh, while Ethan straightened his uniform, heart pounding. Hueco Mundo was supposed to be off limits to Shinigami, but when the captain decided on a mission, no one dared refuse. Soon they would step through the portal together, plunging into the heart of darkness itself. And Ethan, for one, was determined to prove he belonged in Kenpachi's squad, no matter what horrors awaited. In Hueco Mundo, hollows range from the most rudimentary, driven purely by instinct, to the exceptionally powerful and cunning, endowed with both wisdom and strength. No matter where they fall on that spectrum, each one is an essential link in Hueco Mundo's fragile ecological chain. But the recent incursion of the Shinigami and the gods of destruction has shattered that balance. Their assault spread like wildfire, and wherever they appeared, hollows were butchered without mercy. The instinct-bound creatures could barely flee. The more intelligent among them fought back, but against such overwhelming foes, resistance proved futile. Alarm swept through Hueco Mundo. Sosuke Aizen, one of the realm's greatest powers, had been wholly focused on awakening the collapsed Jade, an ancient force he believed would shatter all his limits. Yet when Captain Sajin Tosin arrived with dire news of the slaughter, Aizen was forced to abandon his research. Reluctantly, he set aside the collapsed Jade and turned his full attention to this sudden existential threat. "Captain Eisen, we've detected a significant incursion into Hueco Mundo," Tosin reported, his voice tight with concern. "Our intelligence indicates the invaders are ordinary gods, and even gods of destruction from the divine realm." Aizen Sosuke's brow furrowed as a chill of foreboding crept through him. He knew all too well the devastating power those deities wielded. If they'd really crossed over into Hueco Mundo, the consequences could be catastrophic. Chapter 735, Virtual, What Are They After? Aizen Sosuke stood in the war chamber of Shuya Palace, his gaze fixed intently on Kaname Tosin. His voice, low and controlled, carried an undercurrent of menace. Tosin drew a steadying breath before replying. "They're rounding up the Shu. Our latest reports confirm that many have been slaughtered, especially Yachukas and lower-ranking Shu, who are being hauled off in chains." Aizen's brow knitted into a tight frown. He knew better than anyone that these self-styled gods were never so straightforward. They hadn't yet struck directly at Shuya Palace, but who could say what their next move might be? "The informants inside the palace have gone into hiding," Aizen observed. "Understood, sir," Tosin answered with a respectful bow, then turned to carry out Sosuke's orders without hesitation. Though anxiety and suspicion rippled through the ranks of Shuya Palace, Aizen Sosuke's decisive leadership galvanized them. Within moments, the guards were mobilized, patrols reinforced, and every secret passage under watch, ready for whatever the so-called gods might unleash next. Ethan understood just how dire their situation had become. There was no room for complacency, and they had to be ready for anything. Yet his own worries ran much deeper. These self-styled gods possessed unfathomable power, and if they truly meant to strike at Shuya Palace, he would soon face unprecedented challenges. Until now, Ethan had convinced himself he had time on his side. Hueco Mundo was his stronghold. No matter how much Soul Society might suspect his schemes, they could not simply march through the void and dismantle his plan. He never imagined a god of destruction would breach Hueco Mundo so swiftly, nor act with such unstoppable force. Leaning back, Ethan let his mind sift through the possibilities. Why did these gods want Sue? Were they after hollow power to bolster their own strength, or was there an even deeper purpose at work? And did they even care about maintaining the balance of souls across the three realms? Then, as clarity settled in, he saw the truth. Cosmic balance was irrelevant to them. Their designs extended far beyond anything he had ever foreseen. If the God King truly is omniscient and omnipotent, then he must be able to do everything the Spirit King can, Aizen Sosuke murmured, his eyes cold with confidence. "I've been seeing the world only from death's point of view. That's my limitation. But soon I will rise above both death and hollow." He stood in thoughtful silence, the flicker of strategy in his gaze. At that moment, word arrived from the spirit world. The God world had launched a full-scale invasion of Hueco Mundo. When the news reached the Soul Society, it struck like a thunderclap. How could these gods so brazenly attack Hueco Mundo? And why? Didn't they have to maintain the balance of souls across the three realms? Captain Yamamoto's voice boomed through the command hall, thick with anger and confusion. "What do they hope to gain? We still don't understand their motives." "Captain," his lieutenant replied, "we have no clear intelligence on their objectives." Yamamoto slammed a gloved hand onto the table. "This can't continue. We must prepare ourselves. Even if direct intervention is impossible, we need contingencies for any emergency." With that decree, the Soul Society mobilized at once, sealing passages, strengthening defensive formations, and standing ready to confront the unknown threat looming from Hueco Mundo. They'd mobilized dozens of elite squads, poised to respond the moment anything went wrong. Ethan stood apart from the bustle, his gaze fixed on the captive hollow before him, known to its captors as Shu. At a glance, most of the hollows they'd rounded up so far were nothing more than misfits, broken shells, malformed abominations with no hope of evolving into true threats. Shu, however, was a different story. Ethan could sense Shu's latent potential. Even if, on the grand scale of hollows, it still fell far short of what a seasoned Soul Reaper or a Rancor might achieve. For Ethan himself, Shu posed no real challenge. Shu's path to power was brutally simple: devour or die. In its current state, Shu was a hulking, lumbering creature. its body lacquered black, its face hidden behind a bone mask that jutted forward into a long, beak-like snout. Like most base hollows, it relied entirely on raw spiritual energy, had the intellect of a wild animal, and moved with ponderous slowness. Such hollows come into being only when an exceptionally voracious hollow drains the souls of hundreds of lesser spirits, fusing their energies into one gargantuan form. But accumulation by itself isn't enough. Without a steady diet of newly devoured souls, the creature's power soon plateaus. Should one of these devouring hollows survive long enough and feed aggressively enough, it eventually transcends its bestial phase and approaches the rank of achukas. Its hide hardens into something resembling natural armor. Its reflexes sharpen. Instincts once purely feral are refined into a predator's cunning. And on very rare occasions, hollows like the infamous Aranillo emerge, beings that not only absorb vast reservoirs of spiritual energy, but also assimilate the unique abilities of every creature they consume, weaving them into a singularly fearsome whole. Once this metamorphosis completes, an Achukas stands toe-to-toe with the average Arankar in strength and skill. Ethan watched Shu struggle against his restraints, the creature's hollow eyes flickering with hunger. He knew Shu's evolution, though noteworthy among base hollows, would never threaten the delicate balance between worlds, at least not unless something forced it to grow beyond its natural limits, and Ethan had no intention of letting that happen. With a single nod, he signaled his men. Contain the hollow, but do not destroy it. They had plans for Shu yet. Ethan possessed a razor-sharp intellect and combat prowess that eclipsed even the average Gillian by several times over. From his position, he commanded vast legions of Gillians, yet despite his dominance, he still depended on the relentless devouring of souls to fuel his evolution. Should a higher-ranked Vasto Lord ever best him in battle, his upward growth would grind to a permanent halt, or worse, he'd be consumed and assimilated into their power. Hollows advance along one of two evolutionary paths. 1. They hit an impassable ceiling in strength and remain Ajukas forever. 2. They shatter that ceiling and ascend to become a Vasto Lord. Within the Espada, colloquially known as the 10 Blades, only the 9th-ranked Arankar lingered at the Gillian tier. Ranks 1 through 8 and 10 were all Ajuchas, while the top 4 were true Vasto Lords. As the apex form of hollow evolution, a Vasto Lord is roughly human-sized but wields strength many times greater than that of lesser hollows. Their power often matches or even surpasses that of a Shinigami captain. Only a precious few achieve this status in Hueco Mundo. With each upward step, a hollow's physical appearance and mentality inch closer to human norms, and their transformation upon releasing their Zanpakudo becomes correspondingly subtler. Ethan's singular brilliance and unrelenting hunger for souls marked him as one of the few capable of breaking through into that rarefied realm of true Vasto Lord power. Ethan had long suspected that the hollow evolution path was deliberately restrictive. After all, hollows rank among the most potent beings in the Soul Reaper world. Not even the Quincy can match their innate promise. In fact, hollows are the only creatures measured against the Soul King himself. If a true Soul King never ascends, a hollow could one day swallow the world whole. Fascinated by the idea, Ethan set himself a bold experiment. Could he forge a king of hollows? Such a monarch would lack the Soul King's innate omniscience and omnipotence, but by devouring other hollows and absorbing their power, it could grow ever closer to those godlike heights. Yet, when Ethan examined the hollows his forces had captured, nearly all displayed only Achuka's level potential, the lowest tier among promising hollows. He was beginning to despair until one day, by sheer accident, he spotted something different, a low-class hollow whose aura pulsed with unmistakable Vastod promise. Ethan's eyes shone. The others can be offered to the minor deities, he decided. This one stays with me. He refused to let that Vastod potential slip away. Of course, the hollow still had to pass through two critical metamorphoses, first into a great hollow Killian, then into an Achukas. But securing that path was simple. Ethan dispatched his best hunters to capture a Killian-class Great Hollow and feed it to his new protege. With that vital step in place, his dream of nurturing a true Hollow King moved one giant leap closer to reality. After devouring the original Great Hollow Killian, the creature had successfully transformed into one itself. Its next, and far more daunting task was to protect its new hollow mask from being gnawed away long enough to trigger the next stage of its metamorphosis, the ascent to Achukas. That evolution would require the life essences of at least a few hundred great hollow Killians. Fortunately for Ethan, he wouldn't need to do the grim work of slaying them with his own hands. The ordinary gods had already been dispatched to capture and corral these hollow beasts, ensuring the ritual sacrifices would proceed on schedule and in sufficient numbers to guarantee his ultimate transformation. Chapters 36, Divine Gate. Fueled by this relentless feeding, the hollow seemed to surge with boundless life energy, its rate of growth nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a mere common hollow steadily transcended its limits, evolving into a powerful Arrancar through unceasing cycles of absorption and digestion. In Hueco Mundo, Arrancars stand at the apex of hollowkind. They possess sharpened intellect, devastating strength, and a host of intricate supernatural abilities. Yet for Ethan, even the Arrancar form was merely a stepping stone. His true ambition lay in reaching Vastad, a transcendent frontier where hollows attain their absolute zenith. The conventional path to Vastad demanded an Arrancar to hunt down and devour countless hollows of equal rank, engaging in brutal combats to accumulate the immense spiritual energy required for evolution. Though dependable, this route was agonizingly slow. Ethan, however, knew of a far swifter, if far more perilous shortcut, consuming shards of the Soul King. As the supreme sovereign of the Soul Society, the Soul King's essence thrummed with power so overwhelming that merely confronting it could send even the mightiest beings into quaking awe. By devouring fragments of that divine presence, a hollow could catapult itself toward Vastad in a fraction of the time it would normally take, at the risk of inviting forces beyond mortal reckoning. If the fragment of the Soul King could truly be consumed, the hollow's power would undergo a dramatic transformation, leaping forward until it reached the level of a Vasto Lord. Yet that path is fraught with peril. The fragment's potency is so overwhelming that a single misstep could leave the devourer enslaved by its will, stripped of all self. After all, every piece of the Soul King has become its own spirit, a severed hand here, a beating heart made flesh there, even the parasitic Mimihachi roaming free. Still, Ethan is convinced the risk is worth taking, provided the hollow first evolves fully into a Vasto Lord. Only then could the Soul King's fragment shatter the Vasto Lord's inherent ceiling and drive it to unprecedented heights. While Ethan dedicated himself to cultivating Vasto Lord power and even mastering the very essence of the Hollow King, trouble was stirring in the Soul Society. Unohana Retsu, captain of the 4th Division and the legendary First Kenpachi, remained outwardly the epitome of gentleness and compassion, but beneath her tranquil facade lurked a thirst for violence unmatched by any other. Unohana has mastered 8,000 distinct slashing techniques, her blade artistry so flawless that even Captain Commander Yamamoto would bow his head in respect. Unohana Retsu lived by her sword, savoring the thrill of every slash, but lately, an unfamiliar heaviness had settled over her. Once the celebrated captain of the 4th Division in the Soul Society, she'd earned universal respect for her unrivaled medical expertise and deadly blade work. Yet no matter how rigorously she trained or how fiercely she pushed herself, an invisible ceiling loomed overhead, refusing to be shattered. As she brooded over her stagnation, news struck her like a lightning bolt. Kenpachi Zaraki had abandoned the Soul Society. The announcement crashed into Unohana's world like a boulder tossed into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through every quarter of the Seirete. Hardly had she absorbed this betrayal when an even more astounding report followed. The omnipotent God King had arrived and forged an entirely new realm, known simply as the God World. In this God World, souls were freed from the age-old cycle the Soul King once enforced, no longer bound by the trinity of realms or the endless wheel of life, death, and rebirth. It was a realm of pristine mystery, a landscape of untold challenges, where the old laws of power and destiny no longer applied. For Unohana, and for everyone in the Soul Society, nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan gazed at the moonlight spilling through the narrow window of his chamber, each silvery beam accentuating the resolve in his eyes. Before him, Hanging on the wall was the 4th Division Captain's badge, once the greatest honor he'd ever known, a symbol of his duty and identity. Yet tonight, he found himself ready to cast it aside. He had long recognized that, even as a captain in the Soul Society, his strength fell far short of the true power he craved. Not for fame or politics, but for the pursuit of a higher realm, an ultimate mastery of spirit and sword. If he remained here, he risked being outpaced, or worse, erased entirely by a world that was always evolving. He needed a change. Stepping forward, Ethan reached for his Zanpakuto, its sheath cool beneath his fingertips. This blade had been his partner through countless battles, its edge stained by both victory and sacrifice. Gently, he drew the sword free, the released spirit whispering in anticipation. With one last look at the captain's badge, Ethan allowed the memories of past glories and failures to wash over him, and then let them go. He would leave the Soul Society behind. His destination was the fabled realm of the gods, where legends spoke of challenges that could elevate even the most gifted warrior to godlike heights. Tonight, he would embark on that path. Tonight, Ethan would redefine his destiny. Unohana Retsu brushed her fingertips along the edge of her Zanpakuto one last time, as though bidding it farewell. Gently, she laid the sword and the single white feather on the wooden table beside her. Without a backward glance or a word of parting, she turned on her heel and strode from the chamber. Beyond the walls of the Seirei, a hush fell over the guardhouse as she passed through the main gate. No Shinigami dared call after her. Unohana knew her choice would bewilder and perhaps disappoint many of her comrades. Yet her resolve was firm. She would face whatever lay ahead. Back in his office, Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai received the news of her departure in solemn silence. He understood all too well what her absence meant for the Soul Society, a great loss of skill, wisdom, and compassion. And yet he also knew that Unohana Retsu sought something greater than even her prodigious strength, a path to power that could only be found beyond their world. He could not, in good faith, bar her way. Instead, he closed his eyes, bowed his head in respect, and offered a silent prayer for her safety. Now Unohana stood on foreign ground, standing before the legendary God's Gate. It soared into the sky like a living archway, its surface rippling with pale, otherworldly light. Every pulse of illumination hinted at the trials and masters awaiting her on the other side. Taking a steadying breath, she stepped forward. With each footfall, the air grew charged, the boundary between her past and her future shimmering just ahead. Unohana Retsu reached out and touched the gate's threshold. The moment her fingers made contact, the radiant glow enveloped her. She closed her eyes and let the light carry her into the realm of gods, into a world where true power and unimagined challenges awaited. Ethan stood before the shimmering archway, known as the God's Gate, its surface rippling like oil on water. Legend said only souls of sufficient purity could pass through it into the God's world. Unohana Retsu approached with measured steps, her face composed, but her eyes burning with determination. From his vantage point, Ethan observed her intently. The trial of the God's Gate wasn't a matter of brute strength or simple incantations. It was guided entirely by his own perception. In the blink of an eye, his mind could map the flight of every particle in the universe, sift through souls, and sense their deepest intentions. Then, in that fraction of a moment, he judged who was worthy. As Retsu drew closer, Ethan's curiosity flared. Was she here on behalf of her captain, Kenpachi Zaraki, or did she seek the gate's power for herself? He reached out with his telepathic senses, skimming the surface of her soul for answers. Unohana's confidence never wavered. She had spent weeks gathering every scrap of lore from wandering spirits about the God's world, preparing herself mentally and spiritually for whatever trial awaited. Now, with a silent nod to the unseen forces around her, she stepped forward. The God's Gate pulsed in response. Time seemed to slow for everyone but Ethan. His judgment was instantaneous. And with that final silent verdict, the threshold opened wide, inviting Unohana Retsu into the mysteries beyond. The gathered souls fell silent in astonishment as Unohana Retsu strode toward the God's Gate. Gently, they implored her to turn back. Too many had tried to pass through the divine barrier and been cast aside. Unfazed, Unohana offered them a warm smile, bowed her head in thanks, and continued onward. Chapter 737, Drawing the Sword. Captain Unohana Retsu, renowned for her serene grace and iron will, approached the gate of the divine with measured steps. Though her face betrayed none of it, a maelstrom of tension churned within her. The great door before her radiated an oppressive force, crushing both body and spirit. It was as if a million unseen eyes weighed on her, demanding she choose her path. Yet Unohana Retsu would not waver. She was a veteran of countless battles, a healer who had learned that mercy sometimes demands the greatest strength. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with purpose and courage. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she crossed the threshold. In that moment, the invisible weight she had felt shattered, as if swept away by some unseen current. She found herself standing in a realm unlike any she had known. A brilliant horizon stretched out before her, alive with restless currents of spirit energy. The density of souls here far exceeded even that of the Soul Society and rivaled the raw power of Huecomundo itself. Unohana closed her eyes and let the world wash over her in vivid waves of sensation. Every breath, every heartbeat spoke of new challenges and of the promise that lay beyond the gate of the divine. Each cell in her body seemed to greedily absorb the spirit seeds, flooding her with a vitality she hadn't felt since her youth. Unohana Retsu opened her eyes, resolve shining brightly. Far above, in the realm of the gods, a minor deity stood watch at the soul gateway. It was usually a quiet post, few souls ever passed through, but everything changed the moment he saw her. He stumbled back in shock. "Captain Unohana," he blurted out. Unohana offered a gentle, unwavering smile. "Yes, I am Unohana Retsu." Recognition registered on the deity's face. "From the 11th Division?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. He knew many of that squadron had defected to the divine realm, but her aura was unlike any he'd encountered before. A strange, powerful energy radiated from her, filling him with an uneasy foreboding. Although he could not name the source of his dread, he sensed that her arrival at the gateway was anything but ordinary. Ethan, a minor god of the divine realm, cleared his throat and asked cautiously, "What are you doing here?" He didn't dare demand Unohana Retsu's true purpose outright, but he had to know why she had appeared in a domain meant only for deities. "I've come to learn about the workings of the god's world," Unohana said, smiling serenely. Her expression was as warm and gentle as a spring breeze, but Ethan felt an inexplicable chill crawl up his spine. He hesitated. This was a matter sacred to the divine realm, not something he could casually share with an outsider. "You can rest assured I won't be betraying any secrets," she added, though Ethan wasn't convinced. "I haven't come to spy," Unohana continued softly. "I've come to become a god." Ethan's eyes went wide. He stared at her, stunned. "You want to become one of us?" She nodded, "Yes." For a moment, Ethan simply stared, trying to process her words. At last he managed. "All right, if you truly wish to ascend, tell me what you need, and I'll see what I can do." Ethan turned to the ordinary god standing before him. "Please, tell me about this world of the gods, its laws, its hierarchies, its cultures. I need to understand it if I'm to find my place here." The god inclined his head once and began outlining the structure of the divine realm for Ethan and his companion, Unohana Retsu. Unohana stood silently at his side, tightly gripping the soul blade she had just claimed. To her, the weapon felt at first like a Zanpakuto from the Shinigami world, but that resemblance ended at its shape. True to its name, the soul blade brimmed with an ancient, purer spirit energy. The moment Unohana drew it, raw destructive force surged through the air, and for an instant, its bearer became nothing less than a god of destruction. From the first heartbeat after she claimed it, she sensed its consciousness intertwined with her own. There was no need for spoken vows or ritual calls. This blade existed as a seamless trinity of identity, ego, and superego. And Unohana Retsu, a demon born for the sword, a merciless warrior at heart, was the perfect mirror to its crystalline purity. "This is truly astonishing," Ethan breathed, eyes fixed on Unohana as she lifted the soul blade from its scabbard in one flawless, fluid motion. "Draw the sword, and behead them all." Unohana Retsu, driven by an insatiable hunger for power, summoned the blade that resonated with her fury. Unlike Esdeath's constructs, the mountain of corpses and the blood sea, which grew stronger by mindlessly devouring enemy after enemy, this soul blade fed solely on Unohana's own spirit. It needed no external source. Every ounce of her fighting spirit, Every spark of murderous intent or simmering resentment was transformed into pure strength and spiritual pressure. The fiercer her emotions, the more devastating her power became. Hatred, determination, vengeance, all flowed into the blade and made it a weapon of immeasurable force. As Unohana grasped the true nature of her soul blade, a relieved smile curved her lips. She had feared the sword might harbor unpredictable quirks, but instead, it proved to be the perfect reflection of her will. Unohana Retsu let out a slow breath, relief and satisfaction flooding her. This sword's power was entirely her own. No convoluted rule system, no flashy elemental system, just pure, unadulterated strength. She turned the hilt in her hand and whispered, "Draw the blade." A hush fell over the assembled gods. They stared, mouths agape, as Unohana Retsu, freshly awakened to her soul blade, effortlessly drew its gleaming edge. It seemed impossible. Almost instantly, Unohana's thoughts leapt to Kenpachi Zaraki. With this enhancement, surely Kenpachi's fearsome might would be restored to its former glory. It had to be so. After all, the omniscient, omnipotent God King himself had singled Kenpachi out once, recognizing that raw, unreasoning power hidden within him. Legend even said that Captain Yamamoto had considered naming Zaraki as his successor before abandoning the idea. Had Kenpachi become captain, the Soul Society might well have fallen in a single day. As these musings flickered through her mind, Unohana Retsu felt the familiar tug of divine communication. A moment later, the God King's oracle reached her. It was a command that burrowed straight into Ethan's mind, leaving him no room or inclination for resistance. Chapter 738. All members of the Zero Squad are deployed. The oracle's decree rang out without room for debate. Unohana Retsu was to guard both Soul City and the God World with her very life. No mistakes permitted. At the pronouncement, Unohana's calm composure flickered with tension. She had only just liberated herself from the chains of her past, rising to a level of power that outstripped even the god of death, yet now she found herself once more bowing before the might of the God King. Holding that conflict in check, she forced a measured nod. If she had endured countless centuries of restraint, she could bear a few more years of duty. Kenpachi Zaraki and the others would return from Hueco Mundo in time, and when they did, the balance might shift once again. But in that very moment, the heavens above Soul Society darkened as an oppressive hush spread through every corner of the realm. Soul Reapers everywhere paused in awe and astonishment. They felt it instantly, the unmistakable, overwhelming presence of the Zero Squad. Legends spoken of in hushed tones for generations were now walking among them. The Zero Squad had arrived. The Zero Squad, known far and wide in Soul Society as the Royal Spies, stands above even the Gotei 13. As the Soul King's personal guard, they are the highest-level force charged with protecting His Majesty and maintaining the precarious balance of the three realms. Their history stretches back 1,000,000 years, to the very birth of the three realms. When the Soul King first forged reality, he also created this secretive unit. In the war's aftermath, the Soul King was betrayed by the founding generation of the 5 great noble houses. They ambushed him, severing his limbs, extracting his organs, and sealing him in an unbreakable stasis. Though he can no longer move or speak, the Soul King remains the linchpin that keeps the three realms from collapsing. If he were lost, all existence would shatter. That is why the Zero Squad's mission is so vital. From their inaugural leader, known only as the Eye Monk, to each successive commander, the squad's ranks have always been vanishingly small. Unlike the Gotei 13, with its sprawling divisions and formal hierarchy, the Zero Squad counts only a handful of members. Yet every one of them is a peerless master. Their power, their cunning, and their courage awe the entire Soul Society. Their current leader, the Eye Monk, is a towering figure, a broad-shouldered elder with a shaven head and a thick silver beard. His lined face bears silent witness to countless battles won and secrets fiercely guarded. In him, the unyielding spirit of the Zero Squad lives on. Ever watchful, ever ready, and forever sworn to protect the Soul King and the balance of all worlds. Ethan wore a long, wide-sleeved haori and a heavy crimson rosary draped around his neck. His eyes were clear and penetrating, as if nothing could hide from his gaze, and his hands remained tucked into his sleeves, lending him an air of serene composure. He was one of the 5 legendary members of the Zero Division. Alongside him stood Oyo, revered as the sword god who first forged the prototype Zanpakuto, Shutara Senjumaru, the master weaver behind the death robe, Kirinji Tenshiro, the spring yokai whose medical breakthroughs transformed the Soul Society's healing arts, and Hikifune Kiryo, the Valley King and innovator of temporary souls. Each of these Shinigami is unmatched in his field, their accomplishments earning them the undying respect of all Soul Society. The Zero Division makes its home in the Soul King's palace, a solemn and mysterious stronghold that floats above Soul Society itself. 72 impenetrable barriers guard its heights, barring ordinary Shinigami from entry. As a rule, its members seldom descend to the world below, but today all 5 have emerged together, a gathering without precedent in the annals of Soul Society. When the Tenju Chariot, a majestic, mysterious vessel that loomed like an ancient colossus, settled at the outskirts of Rukongai, it sent a shockwave through the Soul Sock, Ieti, as though a great tremor had struck. More than a mere means of transport, the Tenju Chariot embodied the prestige of the Zero Squad. Massive and imposing, its hull was etched with ornate patterns that spoke of centuries of heritage and untold victories. Most striking of all was the squad's emblem, proudly engraved on its side, proclaiming their unrivaled authority. As the chariot descended, its immense presence seemed to freeze the very air. The wind died to nothing, and only the dust it stirred drifted slowly back to the ground. Every Soul Reaper nearby felt an almost suffocating weight pressing down on them, a reminder of the power contained within that iron behemoth. At last, the chariot came to rest. One by one, the members of the Zero Squad emerged, each radiating a formidable aura that spoke of rigorous training, unshakable resolve, and the incomparable might they had honed over countless years. Their arrival marked an unprecedented event in the history of the Soul Society, one that would test every boundary they had ever known. The spiritual pressure radiating from Squad Zero was unlike anything even the Gote 13's captains could muster. Ordinary souls couldn't draw near without being instantly crushed. First to step down from the heavenly pillar chariot was the eyed monk, commander of Squad Zero. His gaze swept over the assembled Shinigami like twin torches, seeming to peer into the very depths of each heart. A calm, imperious smile played across his lips as he inclined his head in salute. Under that unblinking scrutiny, the Shinigami felt as though every hidden thought had been laid bare, and yet they could do nothing but bow in deference. Every member of Squad Zero had been reforged by the Spirit King's power, their bodies transformed into living weapons, their souls elevated beyond the reach of ordinary death gods. They had transcended the limits of Shinigami and become something entirely new. No wonder the Captain Commander himself, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni, had raced here without a moment's delay. Long time no see, Sword Ghost. The aging monk regarded Yamamoto Shigekuni with a genial smile, lightly stroking his beard as he spoke. His tone was at once bold and warm, as though they shared a bond beyond mortal bounds. Yamamoto Shigekuni returned his gaze without expression, offering only a curt nod. He had long since learned that beings like this monk, immortals who had dwelt through the ages alongside the Soul King, operated on a plane far above ordinary understanding. He saw no point in idle courtesy. "Let's get straight to it," Yamamoto said. "You've come to settle the question of the Zero Squad's origins, haven't you?" The monk's mirthful smile vanished, replaced by a serious, almost reverent calm. In a deep voice, he answered, "Exactly, Sword Ghost." Ethan and the rest of the Zero Squad had traveled here on a mission of utmost importance. Standing before the ancient monk, Ethan felt the weight of their purpose pressing down on him. "If a second Soul King should appear," the monk intoned gravely, "can you imagine what would become of our world?" He paused, letting the enormity of his words sink in. Everyone knew that the Soul King was the keystone of reality itself. His presence maintained the balance between life and death, spirit and matter. Should another claim that title, the resulting breach would rip the world asunder. No one could predict the horrors that might follow. Yamamoto Shigekuni met the monk's gaze without a word. His stern silence spoke volumes. In that moment, Ethan understood everything. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 739. The eyed monk, Captain Yamamoto assessed the monk before him. As leader of Squad Zero, the man clearly had his own designs, Yamamoto's role was simply to back him up. Beyond that, the monk's origins remained a complete blank. He isn't from the Soul Society, the mortal world, or Hueco Mundo, the monk said, his voice low and calm. He doesn't even belong to hell. He hails from some other realm entirely, one beyond our reckoning. Yamamoto Shigekuni stiffened. He had encountered countless unknown powers over his centuries of command, but never an existence utterly alien to their universe. He's a riddle with no beginning, he said at last. The monk inclined his head. I've never heard of a god king who claims true omniscience and omnipotence, yet that seems to be the scale of his power. To us, he might as well be another soul king. His eyes narrowed. Master swordsman, mark my words, he's more dangerous than Yuwak. Yamamoto frowned. Yuwak's strength, for all its magnitude, can still be traced and countered. But this so-called god king, his influence is everywhere at once and impossible to predict. He can foresee the future, bend fate to his will, even reshape the very pattern of the world. And as for that divine realm, nobody, not even I, can tell what goes on inside. Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni sat in silence for a long moment, his stern gaze fixed on Ethan. Finally he asked in a low, measured voice, "Then what do you propose?" Ethan, leader of the Zero Division, rose from his seat at the head of the conference table in the Gotei 13's war room. His expression was calm but resolute. From this moment on, he declared, any and all threats posed by the omnipotent sovereign will be handled exclusively by the Zero Division. We recognize the enormity of this undertaking, but for the sake of Soul Society's safety and to preserve the balance of all realms, we must meet it directly. A murmur of approval rippled through the assembly. Yamamoto Genryusai inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the gravity with which Ethan and his squad had made this choice. The Zero Division was Soul Society's ultimate shield. If they believed this was the path forward, then it had been weighed with every measure of caution and conviction. Outside the war room's polished doors, the echoes of this decision would ripple through every corner of the Seirete. But within those walls, the captains and lieutenants now shared a single, unspoken understanding. The coming conflict would demand everything they had, and the Zero Division would lead the charge. Yamamoto Shigekuni's voice resonated through the council chamber as he absorbed the gravity of the report. Mishandling this crisis could invite consequences beyond anyone's predictions. The Gotei 13 will lend its full support to the Zero Squad's mission, he declared, his tone unwavering. He paused, eyes narrowing in thought. Yet before we strike, we must learn everything we can about this so-called God King, where his power comes from, what he intends, and most critically, how to oppose him. Only with that knowledge in hand can we forge a truly effective plan. The monk bowed in agreement. You'll have every scrap of intelligence we've gathered, and if I may, I would ask that the 13th Guard Squad join us in confronting this threat. United, our chances of success will be far greater. A tense silence followed as Yamamoto and the monk exchanged determined looks. The fate of the Soul Society now depended on their next move, and on the information they still needed to secure. After all, the God King's power is so great that none of us could stand against him alone. Whenever the Zero Squad spoke of the omniscient and omnipotent God King, their voices trembled with a mix of awe and dread. They knew his strength exceeded all mortal bounds. He could reshape reality itself and alter the balance of the three realms. Such power was a threat none could afford to ignore. Within the meeting chamber, the seer monk pressed his palms together, feeling a weight settle onto his shoulders. He understood that facing this God King would be the greatest challenge of his life. Even if the monarch bore no ill intent, his ability to remake the world at a whim spelled untold danger. If that power ever slipped beyond control, the consequences would be catastrophic. The future that Lord Lingwang sees must never be shaken or destroyed by anything, he declared, his voice steady despite the dread tightening in his chest. The seer monk believed unshakably in the Spirit King's vision and in the singular destiny laid out before them. And now, the one threat standing in its way was the very being they called the omniscient and omnipotent God King. As his words hung in the air, the entire conference room fell into a solemn, foreboding silence. Yamamoto Shigekuni's voice was low and grave. The God King's power truly exceeds anything we could have imagined. We cannot afford to hesitate, the monk agreed, his brow furrowed. If we allow this God King to upset the balance of our world, the consequences will be disastrous. We must stop him, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, the Zero Division and the Gote 13 forged an unprecedented alliance to learn everything they could about the God King. They dispatched countless spies into the God world, hoping to unearth any clue that might reveal his intentions. At the same time, every gate and fortress in the Soul Society was reinforced, bristling with new defenses designed to withstand the God King's wrath. They all understood the truth of it. If the God King ever unleashed his full might in a sudden assault, the damage would be catastrophic. Yet even the 5 prodigies of the Zero Division, the immortal guardians of the Soul King's palace, could not remain long in either realm. The palace itself, hallowed above all others, stood at the heart of their duty. No matter where the battle led them, it was there they would be drawn back, its protection and preservation their highest command. Ethan and the other 4 members of the Zero Division understood all too well that their stronghold stood as the last line of defense between worlds. If an enemy ever breached their barrier, the fallout could tear reality itself apart. To safeguard both the Soul Society and the Soul King's palace, they devised a careful rotation. 1 or 2 warriors would remain behind to oversee the barrier and maintain order in the Soul Society, while the rest conducted deeper investigations into any looming threats. As the division's most insightful strategist, Ethan knew that the true heart of power lay beyond the 3 realms, in the God world, where the omniscient, omnipotent God King held court. If they were to anticipate the God King's designs, it would require eyes on the ground, not just distant speculation. Resolving to gather first-hand intelligence, Ethan volunteered to journey into the God world alone. The God world was a realm shrouded in mystery. Legends spoke of towering spires crowned with living light, of seas of time that flowed backward, and of creatures that existed outside human comprehension. Even among the wise members of the Zero Division, few had dared to travel there, and fewer still had returned to tell the tale. After a brief farewell ceremony before the barrier's glowing gates, Ethan stepped through the boundary between worlds. The moment he cleared the threshold, reality seemed to shift. Colors pulsed with an inner life, sounds folded in on themselves, and every breath felt charged with power. He found himself standing before the vast expanse known as Soul City. Although in this context, the name was something of a misnomer, for it was not part of the Soul Society he knew, but a nexus hub connecting all corners of the God world. Towering columns of stone and crystal formed a lattice that stretched beyond sight. Floating platforms drifted through the air like leaves on a stream. Beings of every hue and shape moved in and out of arcane doorways, their murmured conversations weaving spells into the very atmosphere. Everywhere he looked, Ethan sensed the God King's presence, as if the land itself bent to the ruler's will. Ethan took a steadying breath. He had come to learn, to observe, and, to the best of his ability, to understand the inner workings of a deity's domain. Only then could the Zero Division stand ready for whatever revelations or dangers might lie ahead. With resolve firm in his chest, he stepped forward into the heart of Soul City, prepared to peel back the layers of mystery that cloaked the God world. Ethan couldn't help but notice the resemblance to Rukongai, yet the city's atmosphere was entirely different. Here in Soul City, souls moved about in serene contentment, as if untouched by any disturbances or worldly temptations. Chapter 740, Pilgrimage. Ethan strolled through the bustling avenues of Soul City, absorbing its unique atmosphere. Though every soul here experienced hunger and need, their sense of contentment far exceeded that of the souls trapped in Rukongai. He paused beneath a lantern-lit archway, lost in thought. Was this sense of satisfaction the God King's deliberate design, or merely a happy accident of his rule? If the God King had intended it, perhaps he was moved by genuine compassion, wanting souls to taste real peace before moving on. Yet Ethan couldn't ignore the risks. Life and death rest at the heart of the 3 realms' balance. Too much interference in a soul's journey could tip the scales in unforeseen ways. On the other hand, if this benevolence were unplanned, what might the God King's true motives be? As an omnipotent overseer, Every whim and decree could reverberate across all existence. Ethan knew he must tread lightly, observe patiently, and refrain from drawing premature conclusions. Only then could he understand the true nature of this city and of the ruler who shaped it. Ethan paused at the foot of the great archway known as the God's Gate. Its towering pillars, veined with faintly glowing runes, seemed to hum with silent power. Ever since he first heard legends of the gods' world beyond this portal, his curiosity had grown into an unshakable resolve. He must know what lay on the other side. He inhaled deeply, gathering every scrap of courage. As a monk who had trained alongside the Spirit King himself, Ethan was no stranger to the mysteries of the divine, but this threshold was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. He steeled himself and stepped forward. The instant he passed beneath the arch, a brilliant light flared around him, and the air rippled with energy. A vertigo unlike any he had felt before washed over him, as though space and time were bending in on themselves. Ethan's heart pounded. He fought to stay on his feet, closing his eyes against the dazzling glare. Still, the force of the gate's magic carried him onward, deeper into the unknown. When the world finally stilled and Ethan dared to open his eyes again, he found himself standing on unfamiliar soil beneath an alien sky. All around him stretched landscapes that defied description, filled with colors and shapes he'd only glimpsed in dreams. A new realm had unveiled itself, and he was its first curious visitor. Ethan stood on ground unlike any he'd ever known. He had entered the divine realm, a world far beyond his imagination. Above him, the sky wasn't a single shade of blue, but a vast, living canvas of swirling colors, each hue whispering secrets he couldn't begin to fathom. Beneath his boots, the earth was no longer cold, unyielding rock, but a transparent crystal that glowed softly with its own light, making every footstep feel as though he were walking on starlight. In the distance rose a palace so immense and sublime that its spires seemed to pierce the very heavens. Its gilded towers and sweeping arches proclaimed it the sovereign of this world, and Ethan felt both awe and dread at its presence. He had arrived, he realized, in the legendary realm of the gods, a domain where mortals were but insects in the presence of deities. Yet nothing prepared him for what came next. Here, in this ethereal kingdom, his greatest power was useless. In the Soul Society, he was known as the Eye Monk, a title granted by the Spirit King to honor his uncanny gift for calling forth true names. Every Zanpakuto, every Shikai and Bankai, those words had flowed from his mind as easily as breathing. With a stroke of chalk or ink, he could rewrite an enemy's name on their flesh, transform them into black ant, and sap them of power, reducing them to the strength of an insect. But in this divine world, naming magic held no sway. Ethan lifted his head, the palace's golden silhouette framed against that impossible sky, and forced himself to breathe. Stripped of his signature art, he felt smaller than ever, an ant lost on a field of stars. And yet, he would need every ounce of courage he had left to confront the challenges of this realm. Ethan stood in stunned silence. In this realm of the divine, his once infallible gifts had simply vanished. No seals, no curses, nothing but emptiness. His power was gone, plain and indisputable. This can't be happening, he whispered. A bitter smile curved his lips as he shook his head, helplessness and loss weighing heavily on him. Could this be a direct warning from the God King? Though he'd never laid eyes on the deity himself, he'd already been stripped of his most vital ability. Doubt gnawed at him. Had he been foolish to venture so deep into the mysteries of this divine world? Ethan lifted his gaze to the God King's palace, a monumental spire that seemed to pierce the heavens. Perched at the center of this celestial realm, its stones glowed with a radiance so pure it was almost blinding. Solemn and majestic, the palace pulsed with an otherworldly energy, as if the very air around it hummed with untold power. He swallowed hard. If his resurrection gift had been nullified this easily, what hope was there if he fell here? Death in this place might mean oblivion, no second chances, no return. And without him, the fragile bastion of the God King could be plunged into chaos. Still, despite the fear knotting his chest, Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't turn back now. Giving up was not an option. Too much rested on his shoulders, and too many depended on him. With one last, determined look at the glowing palace, he stepped forward into the unknown. Ethan knew he had to reclaim his power, or he'd never set foot in the Spirit King's palace again, much less finish his mission. He turned to the eyeless monk, Monk Yan, who had volunteered to venture toward the God King's fortress. "From now on," Ethan intoned with studied solemnity, "you must adopt the air of a humble pilgrim. That's the only way to preserve our honor." He forced a dignified expression. If Monk Yan wandered in and out at will, Ethan's own standing would suffer. So, cloaked in the guise of piety, the monk journeyed onward, from the shadowed depths of the underworld, all the way to the sunlit heights of the sky, until at last he stood before the celestial throne itself. But something was wrong. With every step closer to the palace, Monk Yan felt his strength ebbing. At first, the drain seemed almost imperceptible, but the monk knew that, accumulated over distance, the loss would become ruinous. He paused, searching his memory for an explanation. Had the God King's laws barred all Spirit King-touched powers from his domain? If so, it made perfect sense that every gift granted by the Spirit King would falter here. After all, it was Spirit King's magic that had reforged Monk Yan's bones and spirit, magic that had once elevated him above even the god of death and the primeval immortals of eons gone by. Now that same power was being choked out by invisible wards woven into the very air of the god world, and with each breath, the monk felt himself slipping a little closer to helplessness. Now, however, this had become his greatest weakness. Monk Yan felt a heavy fatigue settle over him. He, who had never known exhaustion in his millions of years of existence, suddenly felt each step grow more labored, his body weighted as though by lead. The limbs that had carried him tirelessly across thousands of miles now trembled under the strain. He let out a low groan, his Spirit King's power proving too overwhelming for the God King's essence to bear. Muttering in frustration, Monk Yan struck his knees together with a dry creak. Even the legendary Wang Jian seemed shaken by the intensity of it all. With a weary sigh, the one-eyed monk forced himself onward. Ethan watched his struggle with dark amusement, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He knew this wandering monk could not be pigeonholed as purely good or evil. Such simple judgments held no meaning for a man like him. Chapter 741, Aizen Escapes Again, Hueco Mundo. The eerie realm suspended between the Soul Society and the world of the living quivered under a new storm of power. Darkness and chaos tangled through the air itself, as though the atmosphere were suffused with dread. Once a tranquil haven where hollows thrived and multiplied without interference, Hueco Mundo has been anything but peaceful since the arrival of those enigmatic invaders calling themselves gods, and gods of destruction. Their numbers far outstrip the Soul Society's Hueco Mundo assault force, and their strength is formidable. Deep inside the Hueco Mundo palace, Sosuke Aizen sat motionless upon his throne, his eyes cool and unreadable. As ruler of this realm, he could not simply stand by and let events unfold unchecked. Yet rather than launch an immediate counterattack, he remained seated, watching and waiting for something that only he could foresee. Suddenly, a thunderous shout shattered the hush of the palace corridors. "Aizen!" Kenpachi Zaraki, the Shinigami captain famed for his love of battle, stormed in, leading a band of purifiers and so-called gods of destruction straight for the Kyonyaku palace. Their blades were drawn, their reiatsu blazing with unrestrained fury. And at the center of it all, Aizen prepared to make his next move. Ethan stood in the shadowed hall of Kyonyaku Palace, gripping his soul blade as a palpable, murderous aura radiated from him, enough to level the entire fortress. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Aizen, show yourself, and while you're at it, speak up. If you do, I might just let you live." From the depths of the palace, a hollow shuffled forward, its malformed figure staggering under Ethan's intensity. It skidded back a few paces, reeling from the sheer force of his presence. Then, with a sudden flare of defiant anger, its eyes ignited like twin furnaces. "You dare speak to a warrior empowered by Lord Aizen?" It snarled. "A mere soul reaper or god of destruction is nothing beside me." Ethan's cold smile never wavered. Before the hollow could finish its boast, he blurred into motion, leaving behind only the faint afterimage of his form. In an instant, he materialized directly in front of the creature. Raising his sword, he unleashed a single devastating arc. Clang! The echo of steel on bone rang through the hall as Ethan's blade cut the hollow cleanly in two. Its furious roar died on the cold stone floor, and with that, the only answer left in Kyonyaku Palace was silence. Though Ethan's blade bit deep into the hollow's flanks, it failed to sever the creature completely, leaving a jagged wound that exposed bone. This hollow was no ordinary fiend. Its flesh was as tough as steel, repelling a clean cut. Yet even so, it collapsed to the ground. How? How is this possible? I Bazuso am, the hollow rasped, stunned. A spray of blood cut it off. Ethan sheathed his massive sword with a casual flick. You're making too much noise, he muttered. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and strode onward. Beside him, Gongqin fell into step, a wry smile tugging at his lips. He knew Ethan well. The captain was a fearless warrior who lived for the thrill of battle, and assigned to charging headlong into any opponent worthy of his blade. But today's mission demanded more than carnage. Deep within the Night Palace lay swarms of hostile hollows, and beyond them, the inscrutable Aizen Sosuke. Captain, Gongqin reminded, his tone gentle but firm, orders are clear. Even the hollows that can't speak are to be captured alive. Ethan cast a quick glance over his shoulder, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, knowing grin. Then, without another word, he pressed forward into the darkness, ready for whatever horrors awaited them. Really? Kenpachi Zaraki replied with casual indifference. Battle and victory were all that mattered to him. Everything else was noise. Yes, Gongqin answered. It appears we've located a hollow worth cultivating. From this point on, every hollow we encounter must be captured. Gongqin didn't truly grasp why the God King wanted to train hollows, but orders were orders. Together, they pressed deeper into the Palace of Night, cutting down any hollow that dared cross their path. Under Kenpachi's blade, even hordes of hollows fell as easily as chickens or dogs. Finally, they reached the innermost sanctum of the palace. There, seated on a lofty throne, was Aizen Sosuke, still as stone, yet somehow aware of everything around him. His unblinking eyes seemed to penetrate the palace walls and lay upon Kenpachi and Makamika as they approached. Arrancar? Aizen's voice, quiet and tinged with disappointment, echoed through the hall. What a product of failure. Even the higher-ranked espadas proved powerless in this battle. Some even fell before the gods themselves. The onslaught of these ordinary deities and gods of destruction had disrupted his work, and forcing him to suspend his study of the Hogyoku for the moment. Still, Aizen Sosuke murmured, the preliminary phase is complete. Through his initial tests, he discovered that the Hogyoku's power went far beyond Urahara Kisuke's theory of merely blurring the lines between Shinigami and Hollow. It could reshape their very natures. Now that Aizen understood its true purpose, he intended to harness that power against his mighty new enemies. Yet he knew this endeavor would demand time and a secure laboratory in which to continue his experiments. This revelation rekindled a daring hope within him, the chance to one day confront the God King, to slay the Soul King, and to claim the throne for himself. But it will take time, he admitted, his voice heavy with resolve. He had counted on Hueco Mundo as his sanctuary. Now its dangers had grown too great. He would need a safer refuge for the next stage of his plan. Ethan realized he needed a safer place to continue his research. Before he could make his move, however, a cold, unwavering voice rang out across the battlefield. Arrancar Legion, eliminate every invader. Aizen Sosuke's command carried an eerie calm. He had already prepared to transform every Yachuka around Shuye Palace, and the palace itself, into Arrancars, including the mighty Great Sujillion. Once reborn, these Arrancars would form his ultimate shield, holding back the onslaught of the gods. His next step was to send a hand-picked force into the present world to further his designs. Aizen's real priority, though, was a hidden one. He'd learned of a mysterious sect known as the Fushinjutsu practitioners, whose abilities seemed to defy all known limits. Studying them, he believed, could unlock powers far beyond even his own. With the order given, the Arrancars within Shuya Palace roared to life. Their war cries shattered the tense air as they launched a brutal assault on the invading divinities. But sheer numbers and fierceness could not overcome the yawning gap in power. Kenpachi Zaraki, Gongqin, and their companions cut through the ranks with savage precision. Their swords sang death, leaving mangled corpses and spattered blood in their wake. The clash was over almost before it began, Aizen's defenses shattered by the unstoppable fury of these godslayers.